and those of us who are online. I really appreciate that. In addition, she just made my job a lot easier. And I had a chance to get a little sleep last night. So I'm also the director of the Creative Placemaking Collaborative at the National Center for Smart Growth and the director of our new Creative Placemaking minor at the University of Maryland. It is so exciting that here at the University of Maryland, we're creating a way for undergraduates to think about and engage in place-based and hands-on community work. And I think that deserves a round of applause. This is an opportunity for our students to understand the expansive nature of their skill set, of your skill set. That as arts and design professionals, as creative thinkers and makers, that you can do a variety of things, that you can work collaboratively across disciplines, and through your work, spark dialogue and build bridges and contribute to the idea of place as a work in progress. That place and our relationships to it are not static, they change, they evolve, and we can be part of that participation and that conversation. So while I'm talking, I'm just going to share, if I'm successful here, let's see, some of the images that our students have already been doing, because this program didn't come out of nowhere. Okay, just cover the top part of your screen with your eyes. We've already been teaching these classes, and I see a number of folks in the room who've been in them. And so we're just going to share some of these things as I talk about. That's not what I was supposed to do. Did I screw? Okay. Anyhow, so thinking about this notion of place as a work in progress, thinking of the idea of space and time, and that we don't need to be the people that come in at the end, but that we can be part of the process and bring our skills to bear. And today you're going to have the opportunity to hear from folks who are doing just that and who will inspire us in their own work. The 15 credit minor in creative placemaking currently has concentrations in architecture and spatial design and art and community. It prepares students to utilize art and design knowledge, tools, techniques, and products to build thriving communities, to assist in that. The program brings together UMD students, faculty, and staff with local stakeholders, knowledge keepers, and culture bearers to pursue community-propelled initiatives animated by principles of creative placemaking, placekeeping, and social practice, with the goal of strengthening and learning from the physical, social, and cultural ecology of communities. And I want to thank you, Dean Shonekan, for raising up the important work we have and the ways that we can participate in all sorts of things, whether it's conversations about climate change, whether it's opportunities for thinking about equity development, whether it's helping and being part of imagining or sparking a conversation about what could be. So we're still working at this. I think this is perfect, actually, because I'm about to say that nothing this wonderful could happen without the work of many. Some of the many. So please join me in thanking all of the staff and the colleagues who made this possible in the College of Arts and Humanities, School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, and the Arts for All office, communications team, Dean's office, Dean Jourdan, Lila, Dina, Jen, the list could go on. The business office, the communications team, both of MAP and D and Arhu. Are we getting back to my slides? Okay. Chris, Maggie, Yelena, and Lorraine. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues in this work. Brandon Donahue Ship over there, the leader, the studio art leader. His partnership is invaluable, and I appreciated him from the moment we met. And I continue to look forward to working with him. And to Patrick Warfield, the executive director of the Arts for All initiative, the associate dean in Arts and Humanities, I was never good at tech. I'm glad I'm not doing this part. And who is really making all this happen. As well as the leadership of Brandon Morse, chair of the art department. I'm not sure where Brandon is. Thank you, Brandon. Mohammed Darpour, director of architecture, and deans Shonekan and Jourdan. So welcome to all, those in body and those online. We have many voices to hear from today. So rather than using our time for long introductions, each intro slide has a QR code and a link to the speaker's bio page. I'm just going to give you an overview. That's my job today. We had 3 50-minute sessions and a keynote speaker. For those of us in the room, there are snacks outside. Those of you at home, well, you'll need to provide those at your home, and we hope you can find other nourishment. We're here to consider and be inspired by the roles that artists and designers can play as civic agents in partnership with one another and community partners. I can think of no better place to start than with democracy itself. But let's wait a second while we get our slides up. And I'm free also if anybody has any questions about the creative placemaking minor, you know where to find me, but I'm happy to answer those. I guess this is when we do our mountain pose.
When will the first class of students begin?
Okay, the first class of students, actually, thank you, Dr. Thomas, for asking that question. So we have a number of students in this room, and if you guys wouldn't mind standing, who have been either in the Intro to Creative Placemaking class, or they've been in one of the Making Place Studio classes, or they've been in Brandon Donahue's Art and Community Mural class. Could those of you here stand up? And you'll notice, let's see. Gary, you're wearing your t-shirt. Gary, if you wouldn't mind standing up, we have swag. Turn around, Gary. Where's back? So Frank Profacci, an undergraduate grad design student in graphic design, designed those t-shirts. Frank's here. Whoa, Frank. And you'll see that they're gracing, beautiful job, Frank. Brandon Donahue supervised that work, is gracing all of our work today. So I'm just going to show you quickly a couple of the slides that I was going to show you of our students' work so far. Some of them I worked with the students as with this project, and some the students did on their own. I'm not going to go through these slides now, but these are some of the products of our studios from the last few years. And this is both about place keeping, place holding, and place affirming. So we hope that you'll join us to work together to create meaningful and sustained collaboration, experimentation, discourse, creative expression, and community engagement. And this was an idea for a temporary bus stop. Thank you. A temporary shelter along the Purple Line in which the wares of the shops that are hidden often behind the big parking lots could be displayed in the bus stop, in the Purple Line stop. So now everybody else is going to have to speak like me, who's a New Yorker and starts to speak slower. So welcome. I can think of no better place to start than with democracy itself and what happens when artists and designers enter a new space. Please help me welcome Paul Brown, Director of the University of Maryland Civic Innovation Center, who will chair the first panel and introduce our guests from University of Michigan.
Thank you, Ronit. I had equally as long of a walk across from there as Dean Shonekan, and I just regret wearing such a boring jacket and pants in comparison to that beautiful dress. So, but thank you for welcoming me here from across campus for this great event, and congratulations on the creation of this really interesting and important minor. So, as Ronit says, my name is Paul Brown, and I'm an associate clinical professor at the University School of Public Policy, as well as the director of our school's Civic Innovation Center. I'm also the principal investigator on a new democracy initiative funded by a campus impact grant as part of our university's recent Grand Challenges competition. In fact, funding for the grant starts today. So it's a particularly exciting day for me to talk about these issues. Almost 3 years ago, during the first year of the pandemic, we began to imagine a collaboration with our colleagues at the other Big Ten public policy schools on the issues challenging democracy. We wanted in particular to explore ways that students could connect debate and discussion on those issues with voting, and do so across large geographical divides. When I reached out to our campus student affairs leaders about potential partners in the Big Ten, I was told that anything involving student voting should begin with the University of Michigan. One Edie Goldenberg at the Ford School of Public Policy in particular. I did as advised, and an initial conversation with Edie led to Maryland and Michigan launching the Big Ten collaboration on 21st century democracy before the 2020 elections. And actually, I see Dr. Thomas in the audience here, who was a participant in one of our panels in that in 2020. So that's a partnership that has continued to gain momentum as we head into the 2024 elections. My fellow leader in this partnership, Catherine Carver, is one of Edie's colleagues at Ford and an embodiment of our topic today. She's an art and architectural historian by training and uses that knowledge to explore issues facing the modern civic square. The work she has done, along with her Michigan colleagues, is recognized far beyond Ann Arbor, and has helped open my eyes to what the arts and architecture can mean for strengthening civic health and democracy. Yesterday, we held a ceremony in our new public policy building to name it in honor of the late Thurgood Marshall, a native Marylander who, before serving on the Supreme Court, headed the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and successfully sued this university to break the color barrier for undergraduate and graduate admissions. While he used the law to break down barriers, Thurgood Marshall also knew the importance of building bridges of human connection, saying that, quote, "In recognizing the humanity of our fellow beings, we pay ourselves the highest tribute." End quote. The arts and the spaces in which we gather that are built by creative minds help us to see the humanity in others and to connect beyond the political in ways that make our body politic more healthy. I look forward to hearing from our panelists today about their experiences making and creating these spaces that inspire and connect us. So we know that most college students want to vote, but some feel confused and intimidated by the process. Stephanie Rowden and Hannah Smotrich, associate professors at the University of Michigan Stamp School of Art and Design and co-leads of the Creative Campus Voting Project, explore how art and design can help address this challenge. Their creative interventions include the design of welcoming, useful, and delightful civic spaces to support civic and voter participation. Together with 3 of their student research assistants, Strawn, Maddie Shepard, and Ben Leavitt, They'll share top takeaways from their 2022 midterm election project at the University of Michigan. So if any of you all are basketball fans or as old as me, you'll remember the Fab Five from the University of Michigan back in the 1990s. Well, this is the next generation of the Fab Five. So Wolverines, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. It is really great to be here. Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you, Ronit. This minor is creative placemaking minor is so exciting. I have to say, I'm a bit jealous. But we are really happy to be here and to talk with you about our work. Again, I'm Stephanie Rowden, and I co-lead the Creative Campus Voting Project with Hannah Smotrich. And we're here, as Paul mentioned, with three of our wonderful student research team members, Ren, Maddie, and Ben. And we're going to be talking, all of us, with you about how we've been designing for participation. And let's see, where's this place? Okay, so by participation, we're talking about voter participation. And we really wanted to start with this image from 2022 because I guess you could say this is our ideal state. This is sort of what we're the experience, one of the kinds of experiences that we're designing towards. But we know from our work, and maybe some of you can relate to this, that even though most college students really want to vote, that it actually can be difficult to follow through on that intent just because there are challenges along the way. There, as Paul mentioned, there's confusions and the process is complex, and Hannah will talk a little bit more about that. So when it comes to encouraging civic participation on campus, understandably, folks in political science and policy tend to take the lead. But we've come to realize over several election cycles that actually artists and designers have a really important role to play here. Art and design can be really powerful tools for addressing the challenges that student voters face. So as is typical in creative placemaking, we do work in community. It just so happens that our community is the campus. And we have a number of really great partnerships with a range of organizations, including a close collaboration with our local city clerk's office, who's responsible for elections in Ann Arbor. One important note of framing for all of this work is that all of it is entirely nonpartisan.
So a pretty good starting point is to remember that essentially college voters are really new voters. I'm sorry, I'm not speaking loudly enough. Okay, sorry, closer to the mic. This is my audio expert. So you've already heard several times, and I don't know how you all feel about this, but I know it certainly resonated for me. Particularly for new voters, the process is unfamiliar, the logistics are complicated, and it can actually be really hard to connect the things, the issues you know you care about to this long list of names and candidates on a ballot. Those things don't always work so well. So we have been looking in this space since 2018. Sorry, I'm blocking slides for folks over there. And we're going to share a little bit about what we've learned, primarily through the lens of our 2022 projects, which really started to center on creating a sense of place. So in 2022, we designed 2 voting hubs in art spaces on our campus. We recruited and trained a cohort of peer mentors who worked in the space to guide students through the process. And we developed an immersive installation, which was called the Ballot Wayfinder. We're going to talk today about 5 takeaways from the work. So these insights stem from the behavioral science research that's been done on college voting. But we've really deepened and expanded our understanding of these ideas through our own creative research and through really the privilege of our direct work with students. We hope they might spark ideas for your campus, whether it's in the realm of civic engagement or truthfully other settings of creative placemaking as well. So make it clear and reassuring. So as been said, in our experience, students actually really want to vote. It's not that they don't understand that it's important, they do, but they want to make sure that they're doing it correctly, right? You all are smart students, you're in this space, you've gotten into these great schools, and you've done that by always being ready, right? You know what you're doing, you're prepared, you got it down. Voting doesn't always feel like a process that students feel prepared for, or ready for. And it can get confusing really quickly. There's a ton of questions, and particularly for students, right? So should I register at my home address? Should I register on campus? I'm pretty sure I registered, but was I living in the same place? Should I vote absentee? Should I go to the polling place? The questions come up really quickly and they get confusing really quickly. And when things get confusing, they get stressful. So it's not surprising that we often find that there's a gap between a student's intention to vote and the actual follow through. And we really see that gap as our challenge. And it's not only about how to make the process clear and legible, but also how to make it feel approachable and comfortable. So I'm going to share a couple of images that come from the voting hub that we designed at the University of Michigan Museum of Art to show how we've translated these concepts into form. So this welcome area that you see was visible, so you can enter the museum from one of two entrances, excuse me. And so this would be visible from either direction. And so you have obviously really strong graphics immediately sort of situating you like, okay, I'm in the right place. And then there's a peer mentor there to help orient a voter and get them started with the process. If a student decided that they wanted to vote in Ann Arbor, they'd be directed down this hallway and into this pop-up satellite office of the Ann Arbor city clerk. So I'm going to do a quick aside here to a little bit of a clarification. So this is not like a polling precinct that you might go to on election day. This is the satellite office of the clerk. So in Michigan, and I believe it's the same in Maryland, I'm looking in Paul's direction. Any eligible voter is welcome to request an absentee ballot and to vote it at any point. I think it's 40 days before the election. So this was actually an on-site location where students could do that. So it's essentially an opportunity to vote early using this absentee ballot process. So the space that you're seeing is in something called the Sten Gallery. And it's in a very central location on the campus at Michigan. And you can probably see from the two edges of the image that the walls are actually floor to ceiling glass. So this means that this office was actually quite literally visible from the outside. And students A would be reminded about voting, right? Just kind of walking through campus. It was like, oh yeah, there it is again, right? I meant to go. And for folks who are a little unsure of the process, could literally kind of get a sneak peek and get a sense of what does it mean if I were to walk in there? Oh, it's not so bad. We're just kind of sitting down and talking to a clerk. Woven throughout the spaces, we used colorful, clear visual design and a very conversational tone of voice when we were delivering instructions or tips. So it might be on small elements. What you see on the left there is actually a custom registration form that we were able to make, or a research handout, or it might be actually a very large space like this wall of a voting area. And we were careful in both contexts not to overwhelm voters with everything that they needed to know all at once. So we explained what was relevant for a particular part of the process, only actually when it became needed. So you can see on the wall, there's some broad principles about voting, and then inside the voting booth would be some of the specifics about how you might actually mark the boxes and some of the other things you need to know. So we really tried to keep this friendly voice through the whole space, kind of accompanying voters and guiding them as they moved through to create a really welcoming and reassuring context. So yes, clear and legible, but also comfortable and approachable. And the piece of our project that really brought this idea to life was actually the cohort of UMich fellows who were the peer mentors who worked in the space and supported students through the process. And I'm going to let Ren take it from here.
make it peer-to-peer. So we've come to understand that even in a really beautifully designed space, people are still people, and it can be really helpful to have someone look you in the eye, welcome you, and be there to answer your questions. Research shows and students confirm that they are the most comfortable engaging with other students. And we really wanted to lean on that during this election cycle. Enter the UMich Votes Fellows. Here are the smiling faces of 20 students from across campus that we recruited and trained to welcome and guide voters. The value of this peer-to-peer interaction really goes in two ways. To start, I can say for myself as a student that seeing someone who looks like they could be in one of my classes or student organizations was a really comfortable place to start asking questions. And in the other direction, our peer mentors were better able to anticipate student voter concerns because of their proximity to a first-time voting experience. We held 3 sessions to train our cohort of mentors. Our partners on campus, a student org named Turn Up, Turn Out, took the lead on teaching voting rules and ways to deliver this information in an accurate and nonpartisan way. We also spent time working on soft skills and ways to create a welcoming atmosphere for those who were visiting our spaces. We wanted to make sure that this group of peer mentors was a cohort that felt like they could really rely on each other, which in turn was really important for creating that atmosphere for people to walk into and felt like they were welcome in that space. Each training session included icebreakers to help them get to know one another, as well as informal dinners where they were able to socialize without us breathing down their necks. We also gave the peer mentors t-shirts that identified them for visitors, as well as to create a sense of community within themselves. We made a really concerted effort to recruit members from as many corners of our campus as possible. You can see a selection of some of their majors. They were also involved in a really wide variety of student organizations and informal communities too. Our peer mentors were able to bring voting information back into these communities in the course of their daily lives. And this was really important for helping us reach parts of campus that we as a research team otherwise wouldn't have had access to. On the chaos of election night at 8 p.m. when there were still 400 people in line, our peer mentors were an anchor in the storm and still having fun. They were prepared, confident, and most importantly, together to support one another. Our peer mentors relayed how powerful it was to hear student voters gaining confidence. Hearing them talk about this was also really important for me in validating the work that our team did to make sure students felt like they had access to these voting spaces and information. I'm going to pass it off to Maddie to talk more about how we got these student voters into our space and starting their journey to become lifelong voters.
All right. So our third takeaway was make it playful and inviting. So my introduction into this project was in the fall of 2021 when I was a student in Hannah's exhibition design class. In the class, we were given a challenge to create an exhibit that helped students participate in the midterm elections. Now, at the time, the openness of the prompt was honestly really intimidating. We were told at this stage to be less concerned with the practicality of the end results and instead just allow our creativity to run wild. Looking back, being given that freedom to play and encouragement to pursue seemingly crazy and off-the-wall ideas both propelled the class forward and set up our research team with exciting ideas to continue to develop. So we know that part of the challenge for student voters is how overwhelming it can feel to actually encounter the ballot for the first time. So what do we do to make it playful and inviting? We blew it up. We stretched the 35-foot vinyl graphic of the ballot across the floor of the gallery, allowing it to spill into the hallway, visually summoning people to enter and inviting them to literally walk through their ballot. We designed the entire look and feel of the space to entice passersby before they even realized that this was indeed a learning and civic experience. Once inside, we brought an element of play into every aspect that we could, utilizing soft but engaging colors and the nostalgic playground-like forms of the ballot wayfinding structures that represented local, state, and federal offices. We thought carefully about the texture of interaction, like the spinnable nature of the cubes themselves, and how to send visual cues through form to invite someone to interact with the elements, rewarding them with information as they do so. We used conversational, sometimes even cheeky language and approachable typography. We knew that we couldn't overwhelm students with too much information. Speaking for myself, I remember my eyes glazing over the first time someone told me, "Oh, and there's also a judicial, nonpartisan section of your ballot." So we translated the judicial section into a three-dimensional infographic using architectural felt for added dimensionality and texture. The simple forms cut through the dense information and prioritized the top message for students, that yes, in Michigan, you do vote for judges. Here in bright yellow, you can see the open positions and some context, so you can begin to understand where they sit within the court system. With the odds against us still in terms of dry and eye-glazing content, we nonetheless tackled the proposal section. Once again, we use scale to playfully signal that yes, the language is long and it can be really complicated. And honestly, it's totally normal to feel overwhelmed at this point. We recognized that our role here was simply to give an encouraging pat on the back and provide the tools in the form of links to well-researched, nonpartisan resources to help ease the stress and allow students to feel more prepared. A research table area normalized the idea that everyone needs to learn more. And of course, we couldn't resist including playful interactions here as well in the form of a spinnable number 3. All of this combined to create a playful and inviting space and ultimately a hands-on learning experience that we hoped would be remembered as students entered into their voting booths. I'm going to let Ben take it from here to tell you more about how we developed substantive and relevant information once they're within the space.
So moving on to make it relevant, we knew that students cared about the issues. This was really clear on our campus. And more broadly, a recent study has shown that students want to be democratically engaged, but 1 in 2 Gen Z non-voters said that lack of information was a barrier to voting. When student voters are confronted with this long, dense ballot, it can be hard for them to understand where the issues are. How do topics like the environment translate into the offices on this ballot? Students want to be democratically engaged, but they need help making these connections. So in order to make the ballot relevant to students, we researched each office through the lens of the issues that they cared about and the impact that this office could have on those issues. Since students may not be familiar with many of the local and nonpartisan offices in the first place, we wanted to include general descriptions as well. For each issue area, we searched for specific examples that would feel relevant to students' lives. For example, we connected issues like the environment to the county commissioner's ability to impact local waterways surrounding our campus. So this is a picture of the Huron River, which is a favorite spot for U of M students. And finally, after completing the matrix connecting issues to offices on the ballot, we selected 3 key examples for each office, being sure to present a variety of issues. Throughout this process, we relied on feedback from our partners and a range of outside experts. And having this variety of vantage points was a really important part of the project because we understood that the student voters we were targeting also reflected this breadth of backgrounds and perspectives. And it was also important for us to ensure that we used accurate and nonpartisan language so that all voters would find this information to be both relevant and trustworthy. The result was a series of cubes, each one representing a single office. On one side was a general description of the office, and on each of the other 3 sides, we highlighted a specific issue. Each of those sides was color-coded according to the issue. Here you'll see that green signifies the environment. And the first sentence offered general insight into how the office impacted an issue, while the second sentence identified a specific salient example of how it might influence the lives of student voters. And perfecting this language, making it concise, conversational, accurate, And of course, nonpartisan was a lot harder than it may look. And just for fun, as we were working, we had to react to evolving national issues, such as the overturning of Roe versus Wade. We hope that bringing this kind of content into a public, inviting space would encourage students to engage with it together. We know that one of the best ways to embed learning is for it to happen in a social, interactive way. And with that, I'll hand things over to Stephanie.
All right, so we have arrived at our fifth takeaway for us and for you, which is around making it social. So we're always thinking about the importance of moments of social interaction throughout the registration and voting experience. And by social, we're really thinking here about the value of face-to-face and in-person interactions. And that could be, it is friends moving through the ballot in the ballot wayfinder, installation, talking, learning, or students being able to ask a question in person to a clerk, or a peer mentor explaining the registration process. We're always thinking about how to embed some positive social interaction at points along the student voter journey. So what we wanted to talk about more this afternoon was the way we experimented with the end point of that journey this year. In the case of our voting hubs on campus, that's often the moment when you're dropping your absentee ballot into the ballot drop box. So we gave a lot of thought to the experience of a new voter, maybe a first-time voter. We didn't want it to be anticlimactic. They've just experienced this accomplishment, particularly for someone who's coming alone, how to sort of mark the moment with something celebratory, maybe irresistibly Instagrammable. So enter the button mural. So you're looking at about 2,000 voting buttons that we attached to architectural felt, and it made for a vibrant visual pop. And best of all, everyone looked really great in front of it. So we also thought it would be really valuable at that moment to have a peer mentor to sort of help acknowledge the moment. But just having someone stand around waiting for that moment felt like that would be really awkward. So what could they be doing? So we considered how compelling it is to watch someone make something or to make something yourself, especially if it's easy and fun. So step 2 was the button making cart, which is a little cropped off here, but you can see our fellow at the button making cart. So each day, a peer mentor would wheel the cart out with supplies, and during a slow time, they would be making buttons, but they'd also invite people walking by to make their own vote button. And honestly, this cart, which really we just tried on a hunch, surpassed our expectations. It really hit the sweet spot for visitors of delight and surprise, with a really easy entry point for conversation as well as making. So sometimes the chats were one-on-one and fairly just lighthearted, a lot of joking around. Sometimes they were super earnest, like this conversation between a peer mentor and a freshman who really wanted to ask about classes and majors to choose from. But often the cart was just a really fun gathering spot. It's kind of like a watering hole that attracted group attention, and its value for creative placemaking honestly surprised us. It was really well suited for extroverts as well as introverts. It kind of fostered a sense of belonging. And we really loved seeing students connect their voting experience with something that was student-centered, that was fun, and actually kind of light in contrast to the weight of voting. And we also noticed that the moment of making a button has a little bit of magic to it after you've pulled down the lever. It's kind of a definitive accomplishment, maybe a little bit like voting itself. And of course, once you've made your button, you can wear it and carry the experience forward, share it with others, and celebrate your voter identity. So this was really just one small part of our larger project in 2022, but we wanted to share it because it was a discovery and one that supported the kind of social space that we wanted to create. And it was just one of many discoveries that happen with any creative project. I'm sure you all can relate to that. And those become seeds for future exploration. And we are already in motion with some of those seeds for future exploration towards 2024.
There's one more beautiful image of the button making. But we actually wanted to end here where we started, because this image for us really reminds us of why we do this work. I won't lie, the work has been hard and it has been pretty complicated. It stretched us in all sorts of really interesting ways, but it has also been immensely rewarding and truly joyful. And I think I'm going to go ahead and speak for all of us and say that we have really been energized by the idea that not only are we helping students at this one particular task, but we're really kind of setting in motion this longer relationship with voting and starting it and basing it in this positive experience in this really welcoming and delightful civic space. So thank you.
So Ronit, just doing a time check, how much?
We have 10 minutes for Q&A.
Okay, so I'm going to just start out by thanking this panel because I've learned a lot, and I want to congratulate you on this great work. And I also just want to kick off by just asking, what you were doing was moving outside of a comfort zone, clearly. I mean, you are creative, artistic people taking on a ballot and trying to describe what a local judge does or a local, municipal official does. That's not your academic wheelhouse. So I guess I'd ask both the students and our faculty on this panel, what was that experience like? And did you approach it with some trepidation, or were you eager to take it on? And then really, how did you learn something that was different from what you've probably been studying? We can start.
I'll just say briefly that that piece of the work in particular, that piece of the work in particular, we approached it because we're like, wow, there's really nothing out there like this. And we very quickly discovered why that was. But I mean, we dove in. I think as with a lot of this work, on some level, we didn't fully appreciate just how hard some of the tasks we were taking on would be. Ben should probably speak to this because he did a lot of the legwork on that, but I would say that we did our best to really make use of the amazing resources in other parts of the universe.
Yeah. So I personally come from a background in history, but yeah, the research process was in depth, and I think we definitely depended on our partners at the public policy school in Michigan. They were tremendous when it came to vetting the examples we chose. Yeah, it was a long process, but definitely involves a lot of partners.
I'm not sure if this answers your question, but I think all creative projects start with an itch. And our itch was, wouldn't it be great if there was some way that you knew you're interested in issue X, I'm interested in the environment, and then suddenly on your ballot, all the offices that relate to the environment would light up. So you would know where to focus your energy. So we weren't able to pull that off, but I think we really did have that itch that we really wanted to help people make those connections. And we were learning a lot in the process. But as Ben said, we really had to lean on a lot of experts in other areas in order to pull this off.
Would you like me to walk around with the mic or just ask people to stand up and we have one here?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Hi, very good presentation. Thank you. Do you have any data that you found for how voting happened with students years prior to the event that you did, and how much you impacted voting your time? And then what are you taking forward from that to the next one? Because you have 1 and 2 years.
And I'll pass it to you. So I'm really glad that you asked that question because it is a question that naturally comes to mind. So we won't have data about campus participation overall until those numbers get crunched at a center at Tufts. It's late summer, early fall. It's a little hard to compare election to election because every election, the last couple of elections, has been its own strange thing, right? We can tell you over the course of these last 2 elections that we've done voting hubs on campus, that the hubs facilitated over 9,000 registrations and 13,000 absentee ballots passed. But I think the question you're asking is, how do we compare to previous elections? I'm not sure that we're in a position yet to be able to answer that with a whole lot of precision. I know, do you have?
Can't answer though how many students you registered to vote in the last 2 years, right, in the 2 cycles.
Yes.
So that may be worthwhile to share it.
So that was the 9,000.
Yeah, that's the 9,000 in the 2 set. But again, there's many people working on campus working to register. But I want to be clear that we work as part of the UMich Votes Coalition, and there's multiple organizations, and particularly in 2022, people were all over the diag, the sort of center of campus, very, very eagerly working to register students. But I think the other piece of your question, there's a hand up. I know.
I'll just walk up and we have time for one more question. So, oh, well, I'm sorry. It's too late. Okay, so we got a student out here.
I'm just, I might have missed something. Is there an actual creative placemaking minor or major or anything there? Or is this just the School of Art and Design that happened to find something that is utilizing creative placemaking in theory for that's that? Okay, so here's my question. Is there any way like that within the context of this process that you are actively incorporating theater as an art form?
No, not yet. But let's talk.
We have time for, I want to have one student question, please. So, please.
Hi, my name's Yash. I'm an architecture student here. My question is, this seems like the way you've executed this project seems like a very replicatable and a duplicatable process. What possible projects are you envisioning, I guess, like where you can have this kind of participatory experience, just like other than just for voting, that are more relevant in your university?
So let me just make sure I understand the question. So your question is, how could this be used for other kinds of engagement? aside from voting?
Correct.
Yeah. It's a great question. No, we haven't thought a lot about that, but we hope that that would be fantastic if that spawned other ideas. I don't think that answers your question, but let's talk.
All right, I can't say no to Dr. Thomas because he has his hand up. So, one question and a quick answer.
I'm a professor here in the Department of Health Policy and Management at the School of Public Health. And Ren, Madeline, Ben, wow, that was amazing. While you were talking, your professors were levitating. And so what I'm interested in is the relationship that you now have with your students as a result of working on something like this. We have these barriers, professor, students. How has that changed working in something collaboratively in your relationship with these three young scholars?
I was hoping to give the mic to them to answer that question.
Yeah, sure. So I was brought into this project by Stephanie. I took a class of hers last winter that was actually essentially about this exact same project. And she pulled me aside and she said, "What are you doing this summer?" And I said, "I'm going to be here. What would you like?" And I worked with her the entire summer. I worked with the team the entire summer on creating this idea of like the voting peer mentors and how you bring these people into the spaces and give them someone who they can talk to who is someone of their own communities. And I think that we had a very kind of come and go. They were incredibly like graceful about like my other commitments that summer and finding ways for us to engage on, I would say, a very horizontal plane. It felt like a lot of those conversations were very open. And even though I was brought on for this very specific purpose of getting this peer mentor program off the ground, I was still involved in a lot of the processes related to the design work and laying out spaces and marketing. Like I was involved in all those conversations. I'd be working on a spreadsheet, creating interview questions and finding places and people to reach out to. And then I'd be yanked over and I'd say, "We're going to talk about this mock-up we made of the space," and everyone's going to give 3 ideas about X, Y, or Z. So it felt incredibly horizontal to me instead of like a vertical hierarchical type relationship.
Might add to that a little bit and just say, like, when we first started, we call ourselves Feast at the University of Michigan. We're a Feast team. And I remember, Hannah, you pulled us aside and just kind of said that our working relationship was going to change. We were going to be seen more as collaborators and partners and not necessarily like, having a hierarchical, you know the word I'm looking for, relationship with like professor and student. I think like that, just like starting from that point, like obviously really opened up like doors for spewing out crazy ideas and being vulnerable and being messy. And I really appreciated that. And I feel both close to both of you. I borrowed a drum set from you at one point. Like it's really lovely. And I look forward to having that continue to develop. And I think this project gave us that opportunity to do so.
I'm sure.
That's fun.
Yeah, so I was definitely focused on the research aspect of this project, but Hannah and Stephanie did an amazing job of, like Ren said, making sure everyone was incorporated in every aspect of the project, whether that was design, the layout of the spaces. So it's been a really interesting journey for me to get to be involved in something that's more art and design focused.
Thank you for that great question. I feel much more confident about the future of our democracy. I was going to say with future leaders like you, but you are current leaders. So congratulations to you. To your professors. And Marilyn, thank you to this great panel. So.
Thank you so much. We're going to take about a 10-minute break and get started as close to about 3:35 as we possibly.
Really sorry. I completely like. Like, I bring up. I can say that really. Literally.
Tried to be it. I probably bring some up. But seriously, I'm sorry to beat it out. That's like impossible. They're really. Yeah. First time I heard it. It's flavor. It's pretty good. Yeah. I gotta go to. It's a lecture series. I'm already like, it's a concept idea. He's great. He's great.
And I invite you back in to find some seats.
Yeah.
Invite you all back into your seats as we get started with our keynote.
All right, we'll be back. Okay, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Sort of. Yeah, what should I do? Should I switch mics? Is this one better? Woo! Much better. Okay. We'll use this one then. So, what an amazing presentation. Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work. I have to say my favorite slide was the one with all the stuff when you guys were playing. And I hope my studio here saw all that, and we'll keep the faith as they're doing similar things right now. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Jennifer Hughes from the NEA. So I'm finding my notes while I do that. Okay. This is her. So Jen Hughes, and I first met, we were trying to figure this out at least 13 years ago, or something like that, prior her to having this position. And we've had the opportunity to kind of cross paths at different points. I think I'm watching each other's work. And it's just such a pleasure to have her here today, because we first met at a creative placemaking gathering that took place in Micah. And so the idea that she's here to help us celebrate and, you know, give us more energy for this project and for the launching of the minor really feels just perfect. So thank you, Jen. So Jen is a senior advisor to the Chair for Partnerships, Expansion, and Innovation for the National Endowment for the Arts. She supports Chair Jackson's strategic vision by advancing partnerships with federal agencies and philanthropy, extending the mission and reach of the NEA. In this position, she assists the chair in the development and implementation of key programming priorities to elevate the role of arts, culture, and design in advancing the well-being of communities and individuals. She's held multiple positions at the NEA, and most recently, she served as the Director of Design and Creative Placemaking. As director, she led the evolution of the agency's Our Town grant program. And if you're not familiar with that program, I suggest that you take a look at it. It's really an amazing, amazing program that's had a lot of influence in communities across the country. She has helped to broaden the offerings of the Mayor's Institute on City Design and Citizens Institute on Rural Design, two key leadership initiatives at the NEA. Jen has held prior agency positions as community solutions specialist and design specialist, playing a significant role in forging partnerships across federal and local government and in helping to shape the agency's design investments. The National Endowment for the Arts is a gift to us, and having people like Jen in these positions assisting that work and assisting the communities in advancing arts and culture is really spectacular. Jen is trained as an urban planner. So I think that's an interesting thing to note as we think about our cross-disciplinary work and where it leads us. She previously worked for the District of Columbia's government and is passionate about the role of arts and design in furthering community-led goals. She received a Bachelor of Science degree in management from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree in city planning from University of California, Berkeley. Please join me in welcoming her today.
Thank you, Ronit. That was such a lovely introduction. I just want to acknowledge all that it takes to make a program like this possible. Acknowledging Dean Stephanie Shonekan, Dean Don Jourdan, Gerrit Knaap, Patrick Warfield, Ronit. I can't even imagine if I looked back, 15, 20 years ago and had the opportunity to study at university, this field of creative placemaking that's really just burgeoned in so many interesting ways. So it's a real honor to be with you all. I think really exciting to be among the next generation of our creative placemaking professionals, artists, culture bearers, keepers, who are going to lead community transformation work that will benefit generations to come. So just a little bit of background, oops, wrong way, about me. I just wanted to start with this image. My aunt was a mural artist. She was the second person hired after Jane Golden as part of the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program by the city of Philadelphia. This is now stretching back decades, 30 plus years ago. So when I was younger, I actually spent a lot of my free time and summer engaged in community mural making. And I don't think I could have possibly imagined just how formative those experiences were and how they inspired so much of the work that I've been dedicated to over the last decade, a career and a field and an intersecting space that I didn't even know was possible to do as a professional role. So this is just an image of one of my aunt's works that still stands in Philadelphia. Her name's Kathleen Hughes. She's since retired, but really left an incredible legacy in the city. So as Ronit mentioned, I'm trained as an urban planner and worked briefly for DC government as a rotating fellow before heading to the National Endowment for the Arts in 2011. It's kind of hard to believe that that's 12 years ago now. And this was shortly after, got it right. There we go. This creative placemaking paper was published by M. Marcuson and Ann Godwin-Nicodemus. It was published by the NEA and commissioned by the NEA with a commitment and dedicated funding stream for a new grant program at our agency to be named Our Town, an appropriately fitting name for the then NEA chair Rocco Landisman, who was a longtime Broadway producer after the Thornton Wilder play. And so I share a little bit of this context and history as what I hope to do in my time here today is to share a very brief origin story about the NEA's work and investment in creative placemaking, plus highlighting how the work has evolved over the last decade all across the country. I'm going to draw on inspiration from our Town grantee portfolio and what really creative placemaking looks like in communities of all shapes and sizes across the country. And where I really hope we're headed as a field and as a country. Oh, so let's start here, kind of the origin as we take a look back. Back in 2010, certainly creative placemaking as a body of work wasn't new, right? Artists and designers have been engaged deeply in community, contributing to civic life and the well-being of people and places since really the beginning of time. But the term was placemaking, placekeeping, place knowing. There's been ample and thoughtful debate as to the appropriate lexicon. But for all intents and purposes, I think you all heard NEA Chair Maria Rosario Jackson share some guiding principles at the outset of the meeting today. And the definition for us has also really certainly evolved. You know, at its core, when the NEA talks about creative placemaking today, we're talking about the integration of arts, culture, and design activities into efforts that strengthen communities. For the NEA, that work requires partnership, deep, committed partnership over the long term, cross-sector, think arts and transportation, arts and public health, arts and housing. It deeply engages community, not for, but with. Often community-led efforts are really fortified by creative placemaking practice. It centers artists, designers, and culture bearers and is oriented towards community transformation work, so outcomes within a community. And this is really the work that I know you all are deeply passionate about and will be leaders in the years to come. And so I wanted to begin here a decade ago, 2010, there was concerted investment in creative placemaking. As the nation was really trying to recover from the Great Recession, it was conceived as an economic development strategy, thinking about how mayors and cities could really invest in arts and culture as a road to recovery. And so out of this white paper and program came NEA Our Town funding. It's been a dedicated funding stream at the National Endowment for the Arts that's ranged between $4 and $6 million over the last 13 years. And we'll talk about some of those grants. It also helped to birth Our Place America, which was a consortium of foundations, as well as other philanthropic funders that were really dedicated to this work. And there's a lot of legacy materials out there that was developed. And also, there was a very concerted effort during the Obama administration that really lives on today that we'll talk about to weave arts and culture into other federal funding streams. So how does the Department of Housing and Urban Development think about resourcing artists and designers and the really important work that they're doing as it relates to choice neighborhood planning grants, for example? But what I'm primarily going to talk to you about today is really lifting up the Our Town program in particular, because I think there's a lot of exciting things to learn and be inspired by from work happening across the country. So in Our Town, just to give you some context, the NEA, we fund projects. So these are 1 to 2 year projects that are happening in community, ones that center arts and culture as an approach to help achieve a community's desired outcome. And I think what's really important to consider here is for some places, like rural communities that are experiencing shrinking populations, they may have a focus on wanting to attract residents to rebuild the vibrant life of their Main Street corridors. And in other cases, creative placemaking can really be deployed as a strategy to combat displacement. So context really matters about this work. Some of the key tenets of the projects that we've funded over time are that these are asset-based, looking at the richness of community, thinking about how to really build on those strengths. We've touched a little bit on cross-sector partnerships. So as you think about cultural institutions and individual artist collectives partnering with a public health department or a transportation department, deep and inclusive community engagement, paid artists, designers, culture bearers, really acknowledging the value that these individuals are bringing to this community transformation work. And they're oriented towards outcomes in community. So what I think is really important to lift up and note is that communities large and small are rich in artists. These are things we all know and that we've really been talking about through the work that we've funded over the last decade. The program and the grantees really help to articulate and demonstrate the multiple ways that artists, designers, and culture bearers are helping to illuminate, bringing new attention or elevating key community assets and issues, voices of residents, local histories, how they're energizing, injecting new enthusiasm, resources, activity, enthusiasm into a place, community issue, or the local economy. They're brilliant at imagining. I think our moment in time that we find ourselves in is just a requirement for real thoughtful imagination of the possible and what our new future might look like, or creative problem solving to a sticky or thorny issue in community. And they help to connect communities, both physically and through process. And so as I set to take you on a whirlwind tour of our past funded projects, I always love to just flash up this map. Because creative placemaking is not something that just happens in urban communities. It happens in rural, tribal, suburban places. It encompasses diverse artistic disciplines and partner configurations. So just some quick facts. Over the 12 rounds of grants that we've made at the NEA, we've funded over 677 projects, $48.5 million that's gone out all across the country. And so I want to show you a little snippet of some of those projects to offer some inspiration. So what does creative placemaking look like in Wenatchee, Washington? This was a project we funded back in 2017. Partnership between the city of Wenatchee and the Trust for Public Land. This is in Washington State. Population of 33,000, so a small community. And funds were awarded to support a resident-driven creative placemaking process for the Kiwanis Methau Park in Wenatchee. So the project really began with an orientation of how can we actually improve a community gathering space. So imagining murals, imagining physical infrastructure that helps to beautify the aesthetic of a place. So that was the ultimate goal. But what's really remarkable about this work, certainly the product, we have some beautiful images of outcomes and places that have been created through this funding. But I think more than that, it's gone well beyond the space creation and into local stewardship and civic power, which has now enabled civic infrastructure in this community to really thrive. Being part of this process led and translated into voting drives that now take place at this location, food drives and support for vulnerable populations throughout the pandemic, really demonstrating the ways in which arts and culture is so critical to our social and civic fabric as a country. And the ripple effects of these projects really continue over the long term. This is long-term work, and we're funding just a portion of those project activities in a 1 to 2 year period through the Our Town program. So in Savannah, Georgia, this was a really fantastic project funded by Deep Center, who does incredible work in partnership with the city of Savannah, where they launched a year-long creative writing program offered by Deep Center, providing writing workshops for public school students to collect oral histories of the community, to really shift the narrative and display all the incredibly profound and wonderful work that is actually happening in this community, while also honing writing skills. So this is a pretty incredible program that goes well and beyond just a technical writing training program in the literary arts. It's really a unique chance to see Savannah through the eyes of the next generation and lift up the policy concerns that the youth are really focused on. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, a project called Imagine Santurce was a creative asset mapping and cultural district planning process that took place in 2015. This was pre-Hurricane Maria, where the informal arts and cultural economy was documented really for this first time in a comprehensive cultural asset mapping process. And it made visible the civic infrastructure in place. So fast forward post Maria, the hurricane and devastation, the cultural asset mapping work really laid the foundation for investments in recovery that saw the arts and cultural sector as so critical to that place, and really helped to set the stage for a $2.5 million investment by the Economic Development Administration in the local creative economy, recognizing its contributions. And I share that longer term arc because I think it's so important to notice how small gestures or small steps towards engaging community in these really creative ways can help to have ripple effects that live on for many years to come. In Louisville, a highly segregated city, the Unknown Project is an incredibly inspiring project that came out and was led by artists Hannah Drake and Josh Miller from Ideas X Lab. They partnered with the Fraser History Museum and Roots 101 and various departments with the Louisville Metro government, with a focus on creating artistic spaces and experiences to support learning, healing, reflection, reconciliation, and action by honoring the names and telling the stories of both known and unknown Black men, women, and children who were enslaved and hidden figures in Louisville, in Kentucky, and beyond. And this is not only about creating public spaces of remembrance, but also a deep engagement for the community in the process. In Indianapolis, this was a project that was called Pre-enactment Theater. So we all know about reenactment theater, really reenacting the past. And this was a galvanizing activity that took place over a 2-year period where residents helped to imagine their city and community as sets of a stage. What would they like to see and aspire to happen in place? And it really galvanized and engaged in creative ways a visioning process that informed investments that the city made in this neighborhood. In Austin, Texas, an incredible dance company called Forklift Dance Works partnered with the city of Austin on a project that was focused on the ailing public pool infrastructure in the city that was crumbling. Artists engaged community members and recreation department leaders in creating performance and recognizing really the beauty and history and stories that were held at these public pools and spaces. So artists in this case, choreographers and performers were really the creative activators in bridging with community ways in which the city could better respond to their needs and put attention into the public pool system. Fast forward, they were able to secure over $100 million bonds for the city that reinvested in the public pool infrastructure in the city. So again, some of these actions can lead to really powerful outcomes over the long term. Man, there's so many projects to talk about, but I'm going to kind of flip quickly so I can wrap up my remarks here. But I did want to share that these projects are happening in sort of the placekeeping, place naming of Native American communities. How do we really begin to populate our public spaces with demonstrating the history of those places and honoring those places appropriately? On the Cheyenne River Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota, there's an incredible project called the Red Can Graffiti Jam, where artists are working with Native American youth and Indigenous artists on addressing mental health issues through art making projects and celebrations of community. In Oasis, California, a very small rural community was looking to make a major infrastructure investment in public spaces. And the way that they thought to do community engagement was really through the arts and engaging an organization, Kinkui Design Initiative, that went out to build these situaciones, these spaces where community members could really articulate their hopes and dreams for those places. In the city of Boston in 2015, our town supported a project that launched an artist in residency program. So imagine artists being paired with the city's police department, with the sanitation department and public health department, and helping to really advance the ways in which those departments in the city can be more responsive to their community needs. I'm going to just kind of move through these last couple ones. Artists also have a profound way of prototyping what might be possible in a space. And I think that these types of gestures and activities often help set a path forward as to how a community over a long term might actually build out the physical infrastructure they hope to see. I have to give some credit to a really incredible program that also exists at the NEA called our Citizens Institute on Rural Design program. I just lifted up one project that came out of that. You're going to be hearing from Omar, I think, in the next panel, who's really been a lead on that. In places like Athens, Ohio, reimagining the city's infrastructure, this historic Black church as a community and cultural hub for the future. So as I think about just some high-level reflections on creative placemaking and really the work of the Our Town program, I think first and foremost, context matters. I think we all know that deeply as humans, kind of moving through the world, but just recognizing the different ways in which arts and culture can be integrated into a community might look different in different places. I think it's also important to call out the really expansive definition of arts and culture. So absolutely, our ballets, our symphonies, our performance centers, but it's also the oral storytellers. It's also those who are celebrating fashion and food and hold the culinary traditions in place. So as we think about these initiatives, to really think quite expansively about what arts and culture encompasses as a sector. And I think something we hold near and dear to our heart is that artists, culture bearers, and designers are just totally central to this work, not sort of adorning at the end of a process, but are really integral to the imagination of what can be. I think it's been pretty remarkable to witness through this program also kind of the evolution over the last decade. I would say when the Our Town program was first launched, creative placemaking was really conceived and understood as a program where you could go to a place and actually see a very particular output, whether that be a piece of public art, a public space, physical realm. But over the years, the projects have really focused on social outcomes. And I think that's a really interesting and notable shift, and probably more important than ever for our country. And it's long-term work, very long-term work. I think that some of the fruits of the labor of these early investments are seen many, many years later down the road. There's so many great resources for the field. I'm sure you all as students and professionals working in the space probably have gotten to know a lot of these, but I couldn't help but flashing up on the screen some of the ones that I think are really timely as you consider and think about this work. And I'm happy to share this slide. And so I just want to leave you on where we are at this moment. There's been so much incredible energy from the federal level, and I think across the nation, in really recognizing the value of arts, culture, and design in advancing community well-being and health. And I don't think I could have quite imagined, probably about a decade ago, I remember knocking on the doors of other federal agencies and saying, hey, Department of Housing and Urban Development, why aren't you funding artists and designers in your community planning processes? Why isn't there language that is reflecting the cultural sector in the same way that you're talking about housing and transportation and health? And I think we're at a moment where that's really shifting in this country. And I say that because I think that we're in a time and a space where we need imagination, we need bold solutions, we need new ways of working and imagining how our communities function, how our social fabric is really threaded. And so this was an executive order that came out in September of 2022. And I think it's pretty profound, frankly. I'm just going to read a little excerpt. So this is from the Biden administration, acknowledging that the arts, humanities, museum and library services will be integrated into strategies, policies, and programs that advance the economic development, well-being, and resilience of all communities, especially those that have been historically underserved. The arts, and it goes on to talk about how arts and culture is integral to helping us really combat challenges of climate change in the ways in which we can be more resilient as a country, in the ways that we can tend to our fraying social fabric, And so I think there's a real recognition and opportunity for you all as future leaders to be thinking really boldly about the leadership role you will play in our country and in influencing the future of our communities. So over the last decade, so much of this work has been about consistent case making. And I think having a creative placemaking minor is an incredible validation that this is a field, this is a body of work that is immensely valuable to our places and our nation. And so whether I'm talking to mayors or public health officials or community residents, I'm always lifting up how artists and culture bearers are some of their greatest allies in communities. Because you are envisioning new futures. You're doing so much to really lift up the visions for our communities and our aspirations. And I think that this moment requires that bold action. So I'm really inspired to see what the next decade of this work looks like and the next generation of leaders that are being trained in this space. So thank you all so much for having me here today. It's a real honor to be with you and can't wait to learn from all the work that you're going to be doing.
And we have time for one burning question. Burning question, Dr. Isabel.
We have a mental health crisis in this country. And at least for one project, you did mention specifically the connection or the impact on mental health. I wonder if you have specific ideas on how designers, artists, cultural entrepreneurs can be better educated to be more purposefully impacting good mental health outcomes through creative placemaking. And what's your organization doing about it to center mental health and to be able to equip with tools to professionals in this area?
That's an excellent question. And I'm going to be a little bit humble in my response, but I think that there is incredible work happening at this intersection of arts and mental health. And what I'm really heartened by is that actually I'm headed tomorrow to Atlanta with the chair of the agency. We're headed to the CDC to celebrate a culminating exhibit that came out of a grant program that the CDC Foundation funded to boost vaccine confidence by awarding arts and cultural organizations funding as trusted public health messengers. And I think that's one demonstration of the ways in which artists are really leading in community as they are trusted messengers of things like public health, of other community issues and conversations. And so I think that's one small example of all the possibility that and rich and ripeness there really is. I'm not a public health professional, so I would look to my colleagues at Health and Human Services who are actually engaging in research around how arts and culture affects health and well-being in really thoughtful ways. And I hope we'll have a lot of work that will come out at that intersection with those public health professionals. And that's what we're trying to do at the NEA, is to really inspire our federal family to be going deeper in these issues and creating funding programs that are very explicitly focused on arts and culture embedded in programs to address issues such as mental health. It's a great question. Thank you.
I'm told we have room for one more question. Any other burning questions? Okay, thank you, Jeff. Really helpful to see that overview of the field and the reminder, you know, that while this has been named very many things, but to also see that we've gotten to a point that we can offer credentials in it and that we have so much work to learn from and to continue. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next panel. We're not going to have a break here. We'll have a break after that. So I'd like to invite the second panel, which is going to be led by Professor Brandon Donahue Ship. And then a few of my students are going to be passing out index cards. So if everybody could grab an index card, and we have some pens if you don't have it, because we're switching up to a more interactive format for this one. Okay. Well, thank you.
Well, I mean.
Hello. Thank you. Okay, so now we will begin our second session, which is artists, designers as catalysts and accomplices. We have panelists, Mēlani and Douglas, Omar, Hakeem, Irfana, Jetha, Noorani, and Amy, Shimshon-Santo. The structure of this conversation is a little bit different. It's prompted by images and words that our panelists have shared. So we will hand out index cards, which are being handed out now. Perfect. Also ink pens, if you have an ink pen or something to write with, that will be helpful. So this is your opportunity to reflect on a word as it comes across the screen, and then you can respond. At the end, we will collect the cards. So if you're comfortable, please add your name. And if you remember what you wrote, you can take a picture. Online audiences, you can put your thoughts in the chat and we'll also respond to those as well. Amy will be offering a public poetry reading this Friday, March 3rd, 12:30 in the Kibble Gallery. Lunch will be served, so just a reminder. Also, Ronit Eisenbach will be present and available for any questions you may have about the Creative Placemaking minor. So now we'll start with offerings. I believe we wanted to begin with those images.
While the images are flowing?
Sure. Let's flow with
Should I
that.
go?
And I'll bring an extra microphone over here.
All right, so we've had a lot of ideas and there's ideas on the screen and ideas in the space. And so I am going to give you, my gift to you is a feeling. I'm going to read you a couple of little poems. The first one is call and response, and I'll let you know when it's time to respond. And you just say the same thing right back to me and we speak together. Declaration. Whereas the galaxy deserves better, whereas I am a mother who is the descendant of circumstances beyond our control, whereas I was born into a female body and have generated life, whereas I am a daughter, a granddaughter, a great granddaughter, whereas the world is a spinning disc trying to unlock mutual understanding, whereas one must learn how to learn and keep learning so as not to drown in ignorance. This is the part we say together. I'll just go back and forth. Whereas I am powerful, I declare myself a living being, aware and evolving, prepared to face ugliness with a warrior's mindset, imbued with the strength of health and wisdom. So be it. Together, right? So much right about mental health. This is one of the ways we gather mental health. One other little poem before I pass the mic. And it's because one of the things I've been trying to do in my work is to bring peace with me wherever I go, energetically. But there's a lot of ideas, but also in my energy, let me bring peace. Ceasefire. Alto al fuego. Cessar fogo. I'm speaking in 3 different languages. And my family speaks about 5 different languages. So I'm trying not to leave anybody out. I woke from sleep as if an earthquake shook the curve of our planet without sides. Deafening, quiet, the sound of a ceasefire. Everyone take a breath in and exhale out. Me desperté del sueño como si un terremoto sacudiera la curva de nuestro planeta sin lados. Silencio ensordecedor, el sonido de un alto el fuego. One more breath in. Exhale out. Eu acordei do sono, como se um terremoto sacudia a curva do nosso planeta sem lados. Calma, ensurdecedor. O som de cessar-fogo. Thank you.
So we all decided to just do a brief offering, and mine is just, I'm offering some of my powers, and my powers are convening, organizing, administrating, getting shit done, collaborating, collectives, and community. And then I just also want to acknowledge friendships. These are all my people up here. These are all friends and collaborators and connectors, and we have sisters in common and collaborators in common. So I'm offering friendship too.
So for those of you that know me, this isn't a big surprise. I'm going to offer a challenge, and especially to the young people in the audience. And as an architect, I kind of remember back to my time in architecture school. I don't think the world is ready for your ideas yet. I don't think that we as a practice are at a place where the values that we hold in our hearts are aligned with the values that we aspire to. The values that we practice. So there's like what we have, what we desire to do, what we know in our hearts should be done. And then there's the way that kind of the practice works right now. And so my challenge to you is that don't back down from that. Go, if you can't find it, go make it. Because there won't be enough places, there won't be enough firms, there won't be enough kind of positions that maybe necessarily are changing the world in a way that you want to see it be changed. So you will have to create it, but you can do that. It is possible. So just take that and don't slow down.
Hello, can you hear me? Great. So I wrote something very quickly, and I have a little bit to share after that. In this space, there are no silos. Poems solve equations, fire dancing around your head like water on an oily pan, hot. In this space, where we go is where you take us. It does not exist yet. It has a chance to die. It all has a chance to live. You decide. This is a space of, well, first I'm here because of friendship, of people who believe in carrying you all the way through, of people who keep your names in rooms and names and you keep their names in rooms, and people who are willing to be crazy and recognize your own insanity as a possible future. You may have never experience the possibilities that we are presenting or that you have to present. Don't be scared of that. Because what he said is true. It does not exist. And people will call you absolutely insane. And you have to continue to make things exist. We cannot forget that part of our relationship with whatever you believe. whatever got us here, whether you believe it was a bang, a creator, a math equation, or just something that you existed. We do not exist without our relationship with creation, which is to create. That is our relationship. You can do that through urban planning. You can do that through placekeeping, placemaking. You can do that in your kitchen. You can do that in your friendships. But the bottom line is one must create the world we want to live in. That is your task. That is our task. And when you find yourself out in the cosmos feeling a little crazy about it, don't worry, there are people out there, will find you. So go on and get in your little spaceship, make it happen. And don't be afraid of what is to come, because if you're inside of it, then I promise you it'll be magical. So let's make some magic.
Are there any responses or reflections on the index cards so far? Open up the floor.
Everybody's like, already? No, yeah, like, already.
Already.
Who has a word? Any word, just call it out. Yeah.
Yes,
tell
yes,
us
this is
about
actively
it.
direct participation.
Yeah, that's a
Yes,
great,
ma'am.
there you go.
Question.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Omar, you just said that the world isn't ready for our. How did you prepare yourself for a world that wasn't ready for your design?
That is a great question. Well, I do think it's really important to, for instance, in architecture, to understand the practice of architecture. I think we do need to know, how things are made, how to do it safely. I myself was kind of checked by one of my mentors. It was like, slow down, you do need to actually go and learn something about how this practice works. So in that way, I prepared myself for the kind of realities of what we do, because that is the baseline. But beyond that, I think I've tried to keep a mentality of, maybe this isn't a preparation, but it is just a constant thing, that it's like a mentality that we're going to just keep trying this and keep trying it and keep trying it. So it's maybe in preparation, kind of like naivety or innocence or whatever you want to call that. But it's just this idea that we're going to keep going and keep going, and it, and then it keeps happening, and then you keep going. So, yeah.
I have a word. Emergence.
Emergence. I kind of wanted to respond to yours too. Is that okay? Before we get moved to emergence? Part of, I think, is to understand that how you carry yourself is a creative act already. And that rather than thinking, when I get the job, when I finish the degree, when I find the perfect partner, or whatever your goals are in terms of like support systems around you, that right now you are sorting yourself. And to honor your rest, to honor your self-care, to honor your imagination and take it extremely seriously. Because I actually will just for the fun of it, I'll disagree. I think, what's the world? What do you mean the world is not ready? Which world? My worlds are ready and been begging for this for generations, is my feeling. Like, I'm talking about worlds that go back before I was born. So wherever you tie into, now not to be mean, because I agree with what he's saying, like you might have to make it. But how do you prepare? So it's learning your field and learning the skills of your field, but then knowing that you are the creator that what you want, what you see that might be missing, what occurs to you is of tremendous significance. Do not hide yourself. Do not walk through the back alleys. Do not be afraid of being seen. When you step forward and you allow yourself to be seen and you honor your imagination, you allow other people who share similar visions to find you, and there is your team. So you are a tremendous asset. Emergence, I think, was a question.
I'll bring emergence because I think it ties into what you just said as well. It is the process of not hiding that allows things to emerge. You know, it is, and also it's the process of knowing your cycle, knowing where you are in your life. There are certain parts that you are going to go in and you'll study and you'll, you know, come to some level of mastery, and you will learn a lot of things to be able to invent the next thing. So you do learn what are the current controls on something, you know, and from learning that, how do you play with the rules? Where's the freedom inside of the structure? You know, how do you break in to yourself? How do you break out? And that goes for, you know, whether you're working at a firm or a museum, or, you know, there's always some sort of structure. There's something that you do have to understand in order to shift it and kind of, you know, sometimes shake it up, and also take the parts that work for something else to emerge. And in my experience, the practice of socially engaged art, that's the process, because you get to have this wonderful thing where you have people who are in totally different fields at the table, and you're going to be around people who may not think like you at all. And somewhere between you and them is this wild thing that can happen. And to me, that's one of the, like, the secrets or the magic part of what we call emergence and what comes from it.
I just want to say, I think it's worth noting that all of us have developed our own independent practices and are working for ourselves for the most part, even though we go in and out of institution. But that I think it's interesting maybe to talk about how we maybe got there to our practice. But I have a question for Mēlani, which is, you have a very beautiful practice, and I'm also wondering about your experience in the museum and how you joined your world of your art making and answered the question of whether or not it belonged in a museum, maybe because you probably got that question. And then, like, took your professional life and combined the two.
So honestly, in this moment, I don't want to tell the truth. I definitely feel like lying, but I'm gonna tell the truth. So,
and I'm hoping I'm hoping if you have images, they pop up behind us, maybe at you soon, but.
yeah, I first wanted to say thank you, because getting a grant from the NEA totally saved one of the craziest projects that I did inside of an institutional space, because that question was on the table. I did a project called Reclamation, and Reclamation was about tapping into ancestral technology, which I believe is our ancestors' ability, and that they had a knowledge about what are the answers to what we need to do. So it's this language that I was working with and trying to formulate and do it inside of a museum space. And I was wanting to do a project around food, and wanting to have audience engagement, and wanting people to be involved, and wanting the public to be there. And I had was arranged for a meeting to go in front of the board to explain how my approach was art. Yeah, and it was definitely a debate about, because it kept coming back, well, why aren't you doing food artists? And I said, I am doing food artists. I am talking about everyone as an artist in the kitchen. And I'm talking about everyone in our relationship to food. And we need to have a artist that has a name. We need to have an artist that this can hang on. I'm like, we do. It's called The Public, where art, I promise you, originates. So the meeting, I think, was supposed to be on a Thursday. I got the email that we had got the grant from the NEA, I think that Wednesday. So literally Wednesday, I think it was I think it was Thursday morning. It was like top of the morning. So I'm ready to go in and defend. Like I felt like it was gonna be a, thesis statement to defend. And then we got the grant and the meeting was canceled. I felt like a little boss. There was a little brushing of the shoulder off, a little, Kendrick Lamar, we're gonna be all right playing in the background. I don't know. I may have danced in my office. I don't know, I don't know. There's no footage. But I definitely broke out into a little bit of, do you know who I am? Like little Jigga, little Jay-Z. But so I didn't have to have that meeting. And then an interesting thing happened soon after that. A whole pandemic where everybody went where? To the kitchen and in their homes and at their tables. And no one was coming into a museum. And there had to be something that engaged the public. And then suddenly I was like, oh my God, this is the most brilliant thing. Oh, it's so fat. Wow. We always knew. And it was just like, yeah, you did. It's okay. So it's, and I bring that story up to say, like, there's a lot that you can get in institutional spaces, but you have to go in with some sort of method of taking care of yourself. And that's no matter where you go, and you have to go and decide, what do you want to learn? I wanted to learn how to fight those battles. I wanted to know, what did it mean to be on the other side? Because as an artist and someone working on the outside, you can feel very insecure about what happens in these spaces. So you go in and you do the insane thing, The other thing is that I suggest highly treating whatever job you're scared to do almost like a postgraduate fellowship. So it's like a well-paid postgraduate fellowship, right? And so you just say, okay, I'm going to be here for this time and I'm going to do this fellowship. It's well-paid and there's going to be some craziness, but I'm going to be okay because I want to learn A, B, C, and D, and you kind of go in there with that. But it did lead me to my own, feeling more confident about being like, you know what, I am going to do my own thing. And this is what it can look like. And here are some other ways. But really take care of yourself. And that's inside of schools too. Yes. Because you will be in spaces inside of a school that, when I was in grad school, they didn't want me to start a museum. There's this, but nobody's going to want to do the new thing. And don't blame people. It's not a blame thing. It's just nobody wants to do the unknown. They want you to be safe. They want it to work. And there's a little hint of love inside of that, but it's a whole lot of fear inside of that. And you've got to make a decision about what side you want to be on.
Question. Ask it. So the question is, when thinking about community and cultural organizing, how does one think about space, placemaking, time in a more decolonizing manner?
So I'm just going to offer my perspective from the practice of architecture, because oftentimes people, hire architects or hire planners And we create this paradigm between the people that kind of own, maintain, or kind of regulate the power systems that keep the kind of our societal structure, whether it's positive or negative, in place, right? The kind of owners of those power, of that power, creates a paradigm between them and the people that have a need for something. So by hiring an architect or bringing an architect or a planner or a community organizer, what we're doing can be perceived as just creating access. And so what I'm trying to create is like a kind of dichotomy between access and actually kind of and power, because you will probably be in a position where, okay, we're going to hire you and you're going to meet with these people and help kind of facilitate conversations. And that's an easy kind of comfortable place to be in. You may have some letters after your name. You might wear, a blazer with a silly pin on it. And people think, okay, this person's going to help me get to them. We need to kind of rethink that, smash it, destroy it, create systems either overtly or behind the scenes that shift that from access to actually generating power by supporting the people that may be in that kind of community organizing role, that might be dealing with, with flooding, with lack of access to housing, whatever the topic may be, and connect them and create systems that actually connect them directly to those people, and do so in a way, I think, usually subversively, that kind of flips the power dynamic. So I'm basically saying, get in there and flip things around and make direct connections, because you probably will be put in a position also of power, which creates, again, another, it's usually intermediary, but it is a hierarchical relationship. So just be careful of that.
Example, Omar, from your practice?
Sure. Yeah. So we were asked to create, through kind of practices of creative placemaking. Well, actually, I'll give you a different example. So we're working along the border of the United States and Mexico in neighborhoods that don't often have a lot of infrastructure, called colonias. And in colonias, there was just kind of constant flooding. People were sold lots of land that were below the floodplain. They were usually flood irrigated farm fields and not told about what the consequences of owning that property was. The government was given a good bit of money to do stormwater remediation in those neighborhoods. The money was getting funneled into large infrastructure projects that was really going to support wealthier residents. You'd be standing there in someone's yard and you'd see a large, storm drain or floodway literally going right behind somebody, but their neighborhood was not to be affected. So they asked us, can you kind of help design some solutions? Great, no problem. Of course, we can work on that kind of stuff, but it still created an intermediary where it was the mostly women that I was working for, myself, my team, and the stormwater, the water district in that county along the border. And so the goal was not to kind of maintain that kind of positioning of them, me, and the engineers that ran the water district. It was to actually put them in a position where they were making the decisions, that they were at the table and not just sitting at the table listening, but doing the talking and figuring out how we could support them by stepping back, and also enabling them with the tools that they needed. So literally it would be like, we go to this meeting and they'd have like a table and they'd have my thing here, and I would sit in the back and say, no, actually, this is someone else's seat. This is for someone else. And they have all the information you need. So you need to directly talk to them. So that's kind of what I was referring to.
Yeah, I just want to comment that I think timelines are things that we need to push back on, because we have to move at the pace of the neighborhood. And you're going to learn about a project called the 11th Street Bridge Park in the next panel. And we've been working on it for 11 years. And the number one question that I got when Scott and I both got when we were working on the project when I was the deputy director is, okay, so you've done this great engagement with the community. So how do you do that faster? And actually, we already have designs and we're already ready to put a shovel on the ground. But then I think we need to go back and do this piece. But how do we get it in here? And I think that the timeline piece is something that as practitioners that we can push back on. We have to move at the speed of the community and the neighborhood. I have another example of a project that I'm working on in Fort Worth, Texas, and there are images of it that should pop up or that have already popped up behind me. It's called Transform 1012 North Main Street, and it's a project in Fort Worth, Texas. And it's a project led by about 9 community-based grassroots organizations who came together over 2 years, had conversations with their community, had conversations with each other, and built a coalition to take over a Ku Klux Klan building built in the middle of Fort Worth, Texas in the 1920s and reclaim the space for people who were targeted by the Klan. And I think that project is a really good example of one that is operating and utilizing arts and cultural leaders, social sector leaders, and allowing them to lead the project forward. And in that case, I will say the momentum behind that project has come so quickly because their congressman has given them significant support and funding through the federal government. So the pace of that project, even though I had just come from working on the 11th Street Bridge Park, and I still collaborate with Scott and his team, and the timeline is so extensive in terms of our community engagement. And then I have this other project that has just started. And all of a sudden they have $3 million to buy the building and stabilize the building. And it's not like they have tons of money, but they have this federal support. And it's like, we're just moving at the pace as which what the project allows us to move at, rather than kind of setting these expectations and goals that are unrealistic. And then when we need to slow down, we allow ourselves to slow down. And I think that's really hard to do in an institution. And I really commend, the 11th Street Bridge Park for slowing down and taking the time that it needed to build that work. And same with Transform 1012. It's just a different model and timeline for them.
Something about decolonizing space. I guess I would translate that into decolonizing your life. The first word that pops in my mind is, of course, access. Like if folks can't be wherever the location is comfortably, easily, in the languages they feel most comfortable in, easy access, just getting there, getting home safely, then that's a requirement. I think longevity is a really big issue. And I think the reason why I say decolonizing space is really decolonizing your life is because after having so many decades in this work and, been involved with many, many, many projects, it starts to shift kind of who you are in the world. And I start seeing myself as a part of a river that, I focus a lot on community organizing and community cultural and arts spaces, and then also arts education and advocacy in arts education and preparing teachers in arts education and so forth, artists to teach and so forth. So we're constantly investing in what's bubbling up, the next generation. So it's like, how can you invest? You may find yourself building relationships that follow your entire life. It's no longer a cute project. You're decolonizing your entire life because of who you care about, who cares about you. And the collaborations might become cyclical that, I trust these communities, these spaces trust each other, trust me. And together, when some opportunity comes up, we can go beyond because we already know we are reliable community to each other. And that can be really surprising. So I guess what I'm saying is to think beyond a project. Decolonization is a global project that is multi-generational. Why would we think that just we get these really cool 3 ideas and we could fix it during our lifetimes? That's a great idea, but it's probably a longer healing arc. But the benefit is that you say, I will show up to my fabulous life with all of my creativity and enthusiasm. And a friend of mine, Margarita Antonio, said, La revolución es el entusiasmo. So your revolution might be your enthusiasm for whatever it is you really want to envision, create, experience, heal, transform.
So as we wrap up, would you guys like to offer a gift to close out the conversation?
This gift is from my father. So my dad used to do this interesting thing where if you listen to the music or ate the food of any culture, you had to look into its history. So you couldn't just go into a place and just, oh, I love blank food. And you had to learn about the music they listened to. You had to learn about the language. It was just, he always used everything as an opportunity to open up understanding that there's a people and a history and all kind of things behind it. So I want to offer that gift from my father just because how you do things, even in that small space, does show up in your work. And so that kind of like shift in our household opens you up to hear more and to seek more. Another thing that he did was that when there were crises around the world, so one of my first moves of activism was the day that he drove us to take off all of the Firestone tires. And also we no longer could buy Shell gas because at that time, and we could no longer have Coca-Cola. I mean, because just to date myself a bit, I mean, Mandela was in prison and there was the, Ogoni women and there was things happening. Shell was invested and so allowing what's happening in the world to impact what's happening in your life. Because you can probably imagine, I mean, at that age, I kind of liked soda. And I just haven't even really had soda too much since. So I offer you those, I lost a taste, but I offer you those gifts to like bring the world into your life and in your practice. And that's from my daddy.
So this is, I guess, just to kind of maybe connect to what I offered when we started. Some of the images that were up, I think the ones that are most important to me or that I reflect on and feel the most proud of and appreciative of the people in them we're just meant to show examples of who we work with, not in any way to brag, but just to say that there is again a different way to work out there. And the gentleman on the fishing boat was a fisherman that pulled up out of the pier in Frederiksted, St. Croix as part of the Citizens Institute on Rural Design program. And it was an absolute honor to be able to work with him on the redesign of the fish market there. The indigenous women, elders, and leaders that we worked with in the Pueblo of Laguna, it was an absolute honor to be allowed into their community, to have shown us their place and to kind of support their vision. So again, the gift and the connection to those images that's who we've set out to work for and with, and it is possible. So go get it.
Yeah, I want to share a struggle actually, because I think it's interesting also to hear about what's stopping us and making us think a little bit more. And I'm working on a global project right now, and I'm finding that I'm really leaning into my Western lens. Like I've worked a lot in North America, and I have this sense of how things are operating here. And I'm working with countries like Brazil. I'm working with East Africa. I'm working with Indonesia. And I'm finding that my Western lens is getting in the way. And so I'm really trying to lean into my Eastern lens, my other identities. I have a very complex background and upbringing that ranges from the continent of Africa to the subcontinent of India. I was born in North America, and it's just, I'm trying to lean into those other places to really do the work better and accomplish more and also learn. I took this project on because I haven't done international work. So just really wanting to learn from a global project.
Okay, my gift is going to be riffing off you guys. It's going to be the gift of mother tongue as an ancient technology. And there's not one, there's so many. So if you're working in just one language, my gift would be to challenge you to work in more than one language. And even if you're thinking, oh, I'll do English and Spanish, or I'll do English and French, try to get beyond international languages, try to get to mother tongue indigenous languages, and they're everywhere. In Los Angeles, we struggle just to have equity among our international languages, but people go home to 200 different languages in LA, and we haven't even scratched the surface. And each one is an OS. So when my mother says, ich means to be, but that's another word for God. It's telling me something about the value of life or the sacredness of life just by welcoming in an indigenous language. And this applies to categorizing and decolonizing archives and museums and libraries. If we can only do it in Roman letters, we're falling behind. So I want to sing with you for just a second. The beat goes like this. Everybody. Okay. I'm going to teach you a very quick song. The words, it's a call and response song where we're going to alternate. Now you, the same thing. We're going to go back and forth. Now you. Last time you. Yay, thank you.
I will take a 10-minute break. Thank you. Start again at 5 o'clock.
Definitely more no, they're not. For this like showing my southern and northern. About having a Western, Western. Get them on Western. Not much. No. Let me go to my. Let me go to my. Let me get a 14-hour. You know, That's just me.
That's what I was talking about. That's what I thought you were calling it.
Hey, everybody. We're going to get started. So people, we have one dynamite panel to bring us to another scale, another case study to look at. So if someone, Bill, if you wouldn't mind, Bill Kulis, if you wouldn't mind seeing if there's anybody outside and encouraging them to come in. Thank you. So let's just make sure our panelists, do you see Brenda? Okay. So we know this is a jam-packed, really full day. We're also recording it. So if there's stuff you wanted to go back to and hear about, I certainly couldn't take any notes. There was too much. We'll be posting that for everybody and hope that you're enjoying and taking things in, and it'll start our conversation and keep our conversation going. So just wait 1 second. While I'm here, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. One, that Amy Shimshon-Santo will be doing a poetry reading and workshop on Friday at 12:30 in the Keibel Gallery, which is right opposite the auditorium here. And that's open to the public, that's open to everybody. So please let folks know. And our studio had the pleasure of working with her on Monday, and she worked at the Writer's House on Tuesday, and we'll be working with Brandon Donahue Ship's class tomorrow night. So we're keeping her really busy and really appreciate your presence, Amy. Okay, I think we're going to move on. Thank you. What a beautiful conversation. Really appreciate the last conversation. So no further ado, I'd like to pass the microphone on to Gerrit Knaap, who will introduce our last panel.
Thank you, Ronit. Just want to compliment you and all of your colleagues for putting on a really fabulous show. It's been really terrific. And what an exciting way to start a new minor, right? I mean, I've never seen a minor start this way. So this is terrific. And soon we'll have a major. Do this again. So I don't know about you, but I can't get that song out of my head now. You know, I've never given a seminar and let a song, but you know, I might try this. It's not too late in my career to give it a go. Anyway, so I am Gerrit Knaap. I direct the National Center for Smart Growth. We are the home of the Purple Line Corridor Coalition, the Small Business Anti-Displacement Network, the Transportation Policy Research Group, and a bunch of other stuff. And the wisdom that I bring to it is that I have hired people who lead these efforts so that I don't really have to do very much. You know, I've hired very talented people to do this. But I'm really pleased to be able to introduce the 11th Street project. You will hear much more about it than I'm going to be able to describe. What I will say is that when we started the Purple Line Corridor Coalition, the 11th Street project is one of the projects that we really look to and as an inspiration. And Scott and his colleagues were extremely gracious and generous in lending their expertise. And like I said, it's a model that we really followed for quite some time. I was struck by the comment about being patient and working at the pace of the community. I thought that was really wise. We are fortunate in the Purple Line that we get to be patient because we really have no choice. Because you won't be riding the Purple Line tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, but we hope that that's going to happen. And maybe we'll have a race, right, between whether the Purple Line opens before or after the 11th Street Bridge. And maybe we can cross the bridge and then get on the Purple Line and do them both at once. So with that, I want to turn it over to Scott and hear about this fabulous project that's been going on in our neighborhood.
Good afternoon, everybody. We can do a little better than that. I know we've just been listening to some really great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. So my name is Scott Kratz. It's my great pleasure to be the Senior Vice President building Bridges Across the River, the nonprofit that has been leading the effort for the 11th Street Bridge Park, working with the community. And I think the reason why we're last is this is an intersection of community-driven design, the placekeeping, the arts, and thinking deeply about investing in these projects, but also investing in the nearby neighborhoods. The two questions that I think we're going to be talking a lot about during our presentation is when we create these kind of projects, who are these projects for and who benefits? And that's really led to something that my colleague Vaughn Perry is going to be talking about, our equitable development work. So fortunate to have a dear friend as well, Miss Brenda Jones, talk a little bit about her engagement with this project and her deep investment in the community east of the river. So to start, wrong direction. Okay. So as I mentioned, the 11th Street Bridge Park is a project of building bridges across the river. We run the ARC. It's a 203,000 square foot campus east of the river. Stands for the Town Hall Education, Arts and Recreation Campus, opened in 2005. We also run a network of 7 urban farms in a neighborhood that has 1 grocery store serving 75,000 residents. We run Vaughn runs the Skyland Workforce Center, a workforce development facility also in Ward 8. And our largest project to date, though, is the 11th Street Bridge Park. And so in our case, we have these old bridges. This has been a crossing point for 300-400 years that connects the communities east of the river of the neighborhoods of Anacostia and Fairlawn with the communities west of the river of Capitol Hill and the Navy Yard. And we had this sort of once in a lifetime opportunity where the old 11th Street bridges, these old freeway bridges, had reached the end of their lifespan and needed to come down. And there was this opportunity to, instead of getting rid of all that old infrastructure, could we extend the life of that initial federal investment and repurpose it, but one for no longer for cars and tractor trailers, but for community generated civic space. So in our case, we tried to see if we could save the entire bridge, but it turned out the deck would have been cost prohibitive to save. So the deck has been removed, but it turns out one of the most expensive parts about building any river bridge particularly isn't the deck that you drive or walk on. It's the piers and the pilings that hold all the load, right? The live load and the dead load. The piers and pilings are in good shape, so they saved those for us. And then we're going to build a new deck that's on top, but one, again, that no longer holds cars or vehicles, but that holds these community-generated programming spaces. So our 4 key goals that have been holding up the project from the beginning are re-engaging residents with the Anacostia River, this amazing natural resource that for too long has been hiding in plain sight. 2 is improving public health The residents along the Anacostia River have some of the most challenging health statistics in the city and the country, actually. And we know that providing a safe place to play can be a significant intervention to that, as well as access to fresh fruits and vegetables. Three, and I think this is the goal that most viscerally sort of connects with the nearby residents. This river has been a dividing line for generations. So how do we create a physical and metaphorical bridge connecting these two communities and bringing together people who otherwise normally wouldn't connect? And finally, and this Vaughn's going to talk about more in depth, is how do we ensure we're not just creating an anchor for economic development, but equitable and inclusive growth? And that's where I get to those two questions of who this project is for and who benefits. So before we engaged a single landscape architect or even any engineer, we spent 2 years just going out and talking to the community, right? Sometimes these projects happen where they're 95% created and then it comes to the community and says, hey, what do you think? But at that point, the cake's already been baked, right? And that's not the way we wanted to do this project, because there's an enormous amount of, we need to recognize that there's an enormous and justifiable trust deficit in the community. People have come into the community and made a lot of promises that for a variety of reasons have not fulfilled those promises. And so for us, it was important to take a couple steps back and say, should we even do this, right? Does the community even want this? And we spoke to civic groups and advisory neighborhood commissions, the faith leaders, to say, one, in essence, sort of ask for permission for this project. And once, and we heard some skepticism, to be sure, this is a big sort of audacious project, but we also heard a lot of enthusiasm. And so we said, all right, well then help us shape it. Help us make sure that every single programming element reflects the needs of the community. And as we were going out in the community, these are some of these I think are obvious, but it is important to think about how do we remove as many barriers as we can to true participation. And where we can, how do we put decision-making power back into the hands of local residents, right? So sometimes we create new meetings when instead of going to meetings where people are already at, making sure that we're providing childcare, that we're providing food. I would never ask a consultant to come down to New York and work for free, and yet that's what we ask for the community all the time, right? So pay local residents. They have knowledge. They have the skill. Make sure they're compensated for their work, and make sure that you see make sure that there's an ongoing engagement with the community so you can see the demonstrable impact of their work. So when we were out talking to the community, we heard on both sides of the river, we heard interestingly, even though both sides of the river are very different, we kept hearing these same programming ideas. We baked these programmatic elements into a larger international design competition. And this is where it was really critical to make sure that, I'd never run a design competition before. And the more I researched design competitions, I saw that many, many times the designers, the architects, the landscape architects, the engineers don't even speak to the client, more or less the community. And that didn't make any sense to us. So we created a group that we called our Design Oversight Committee. This was a group of about 36 stakeholders from both sides of the river. And their job was to review the design brief before a single design team saw this was the Bible of how we were going to judge and who was going to be selected. Weigh in. They met with each of our 4 final design teams again and again throughout this process, right? And that was really critical because each of the 4 final design teams and some of the best architects and landscape architects in the country, each one of them had at least several of critical red flags, right, that the community helped shape. And then at the end of this 7-8 month design competition, the community selected the design team. They made a formal recommendation to the jury, and I didn't vote, right? The community voted. And as it turned out, both the Design Oversight Committee and our design jury was unanimous for this design by the architecture firm of OMA and the landscape architecture firm of Olin. I'm going to quickly walk through some of our latest renderings. You can see where they've incorporated all of these community requested programming spaces into this design. And in essence, it's sort of a double-decked park that almost doubles the occupiable space of this park. It's about 7 acres all told. starting, I'm going to take you on a walk from the Navy Yard over on the to Anacostia, a series of rain gardens that captures every drop of water on the park into giant cisterns to use for irrigation. The trusses get you up high enough so you can see over the Navy Yard buildings and you can see to the US Capitol building, the Library of Congress. Imagine being here on the 4th of July, right, for fireworks. It's gonna be really amazing. A hammock grove, a space not only of physical recreation, but mental relaxation. There's an enormous amount of toxic stress that's out there in the world, and I would argue is in this community as well. So how do you have a space to stop, relax, and contemplate the world? A center gathering place that we're calling Anaquash Plaza for the Native American tribe, the Nacotchtank, who existed here for thousands and thousands of years. A cafe and community meeting space in the center of the bridge, and on top of the community room and cafe, it's a giant green roof that we're calling our green lawn. And on the east side of the river, you can see over the 295 freeway to the Cedar Hill, the historic home of Frederick Douglass, the hills of Anacostia, a community front porch, as we're calling, a medium-sized program space, an 11,000 square foot play space that we're calling Mussel Beach, not Mussel, but MUSSEL, for the native bivalves that are helping to clean up the water, clean up the river. And then anchoring the east side of the river is an environmental education center that will be run by the Anacostia Watershed Society that will tour DCPS, DC Charter School students from Maryland, Virginia as well, and inspire that next generation of river stewards. The Anacostia Watershed Society has been doing this work for the last 32 years. We'll be running the Environmental Education Center as well as the kayak and canoe launch to get kids and families out into the river. Urban agriculture. This will be our 8th Bridge Park plot that we have in Southeast DC, providing access to fresh fruits and vegetables east of the river. And then on the east side of the river is a river amphitheater, a 250 person the space to amplify the voices of local residents and really celebrate the amazing rich history and culture of the region and the immediate area. And this is one of my favorite views of the renderings looking back from east of the river towards the Navy Yard. So we are now at 100% design. We can have that competition to see who breaks ground first, but we will break ground at the end of this year in December. Take about 24 to 30 months of construction, so open up in the first part of 2026. But it's really important that we're not just testing and that we're not just working in our offices to create and design and then construct this, but we're testing and piloting some of these programming spaces that will happen on top of the park. So for the last 8 years, we've been hosting the Anacostia River Festival. I invite each and every one of you on May 20th of this year to come down to the banks of the river and experience on a single afternoon what you'll be able to experience 365 days of the year when the park opens. We are co-curating the main stage with Don't Mute DC and the Go-Go Museum. We'll have the U.S. Navy Band kick off the entire event. We're setting up a floating dock on the right where the dock will be on the park and getting kids and adults out in canoes. It's going to be a really amazing event. Each fall, we have for the last 5 years, 6 years, we have what we call our Taste of the Harvest Festival in the fall. This is a smaller, intimate the event that we have on our main campus at the Arc. It's an opportunity to bring together all of our farms from both sides of the river and break bread together. So I mentioned we have these Bridge Park plots that we've created for the last 6 years in collaboration with communities of faith and nonprofits. And we are not only creating these spaces to grow food and grow nourishment, but we've also had significant art installations for each of these different garden plots. We actually just commissioned yesterday, we haven't announced it yet, but our latest art piece at National Children's Center. It's a beautiful plot over in Ward 8 that serves kids 0 to 5 with developmental disabilities. It's one of the most beautiful spots that's there. And just commissioned local artists to create a giant mural that's there. And then making sure that we're testing and piloting not just at the River Festival, but programming that might happen in the park. We've done a series of programs with Vita, the vegan chef, an amazing chef based in Anacostia, based in Ward 8. And during the pandemic, she led a series of healthy vegan cooking classes online that were really well received. And then we aggregate all of this food for a farmer's market and CSA that happens at the York every June that will migrate to the park after the park is open. We become totally obsessed with mushrooms. We've been starting to grow mushrooms. We harvested 100 pounds of shiitake mushrooms last year. And we're hosting a mushroom inoculation workshop in mid-March. You'll get to take home your own mushroom log. It's very cool, grow shiitakes at home. But when we're out there talking to the community, asking for programmatic elements that we incorporated into the park, we also heard a much deeper need. We heard a need for jobs. We heard a need for affordable housing. We heard a need for the preservation of Black-owned businesses that are east of the river. Where this park lands is right at the intersection of Good Hope and Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue, the two commercial corridors of historic Anacostia. And how do we ensure that the thousands, tens of thousands of residents who helped shape this park from the beginning be the ones that benefit from it, right? And we learned sort of three things, and then I'm going to pass it off to Vaughn to take it from here. One is to be intentional about this work. I think it'd be really easy to say, like, well, that's not my job. Like, it's complicated enough to transform an old freeway into a park. But we need to know that all of these projects have intended and unintended consequences, and then we need to prepare for them. Two, is timing. I'm going to pull up on that timing concept is critical. By the time when there's over $1 billion of economic development that's coming into Ward 8 over the next 5 years, $1 billion, right? When the market really in a city like Washington, D.C. that's landlocked and height-locked, when the market starts to move, it's going to move so much faster than we could possibly respond to it. So by the time the park opens in 2026, we'll have been investing in these equitable development strategies for a decade, right? And finally, and this is probably the most important element, making sure that the community is at the center, that the community is driving each of those strategies. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vaughn.
Awesome. Put it up. So can it come up? Thank you. Yeah, that's better. Awesome. Thanks, Scott. And as Scott was just sharing, like, how do we make sure that the community is driving those decisions? All of the slides that you saw previously, I mean, all of those ideas came directly from the community. And I think that is a statement in itself. And so for us, and Scott alluded to it earlier, we always ask ourselves the question, who are we doing this for, right? Is it for the government, or is it for our funders? Who is it for? And the answer for us is always is for the residents. And that's who we are trying to serve. And we are always trying to put the decision-making power back in the hands of the community. And so even as you look at this stat, one of the things that was really important, or this infographic, one of the things that was really important for us is to be able to measure and track what was already existing in the community and what was already taking place, so that as we came up with these strategies that, they look great, but where they're really working, we wanted to be able to measure it and to see actually where they're working. But one of the things I point out is, there's no laser on this one? Or am I going the wrong way? Okay. Well, up at the top, the 49.2% of child poverty in east of the river. The startling thing about that statistic is 50% of the children in Washington, D.C. live in east of the river. So you're talking about 49% of 50% of the children in Washington, D.C. that are dealing with child poverty. That in itself is telling you why this work is so important. And for me, that's not just a number. Those are kids that live in my neighborhood. They are children of my friends. They are children of my neighbors, right? And so it's much more than just a number. And so, and it just reinforces why the work that we're doing is so important. And so, not only was it important for us to have this very community engaged discussions around like what the park would look like and this amazing amenity, but it was also, all right, like we understand that oftentimes when development comes with it, along with it comes some fears, some very real skepticisms, because historically, what development has meant for communities is displacement. And so what we wanted to do is really to shake that up and to say, you know what, whenever development comes in, the displacement does not have to come along with it. And what we did was work directly with the community to help us to come up with strategies to prevent that from happening. What the manifestation of that is what's called our equitable development plan. It's almost 40 strategies that's focused on housing, on workforce, on small business, and on cultural equity. And our housing strategy, and so I'll just briefly go through some of those strategies. In our housing strategies, we have a Ward 8 Homebuyers Club where we've been working closely with our partner, Mana, who has been hosting these and facilitating these homebuyers clubs over the last 6 years. And since that time, we've actually had 122 people who have purchased homes in Ward 8. 122 families homes might not sound like a lot, but it's a lot to those families. And what it has done is change the paradigm for those families so that now that they could create generational wealth. Or creating things like innovative project like the Douglas Community Land Trust, where if you're not familiar with community land trust, it's about preserving permanent homes into perpetuity. Community land trusts have been taking place over the last 50 years. However, we didn't have anything, at least to the capacity that the Douglas Community Land Trust is right here in the city. And so being able to try out different ideas and models that can be scaled up later on from the city. We also have been working really closely with the Skyland Workforce Center, which I'm now the director of. But for that, it's so oftentimes when development is coming, one of the biggest concerns that we hear from residents is, but what about the jobs for the local residents? And so oftentimes, unfortunately, some of those contractors and developers get away with bringing in their own staff and not hiring people from the local community. And so from day one, what we wanted to do is go and speak with construction companies, with workforce development organizations to tell them, hey, this park is coming. This is going to be the skills that are going to be needed. These are the jobs that are going to be available. And Skyland Workforce Center has hosted we're coming up on our 27th construction training program in March, where we've already trained 267 people. And many of those people have already been placed into jobs. And what we've been doing is tracking them so that once we have a general contractor selected for the Bridge Park, we can point them to this database of local residents who have been trained and has some experience so that they can have opportunities to work on the park as well. We also have been working with the small business organizations and like nonprofits like the Washington Area Community Investment Fund, providing technical assistance, providing microloans. Currently, we have a couple of different projects where one is supporting some 10 businesses in the Anacostia Business Improvement District. And so it's a collaboration between the Bridge Park and Booz Allen. And what Booz Allen is doing is offering in-kind mentorship. And the Bridge Park was able to secure some funds in order to support these businesses with business strategies, with front of house, with the back-end booking, with marketing and things of that nature. And so again, as we know the park is going to be built, we know that it's going to attract more of a audience and more attention, and it's going to also increase the the footprint of folks that are in the businesses. And so we want to be able to make sure that they are able and to receive the capacity of the increased population. A lot of what we've been talking about today, cultural equity, right? For us, it's how do we make sure that the same stories that were being told by our grandparents are being told by our grandchildren. And oftentimes what happens when we start to talk about displacement, we don't talk about the cultural displacement that takes place in communities, right? We'll hear about how folks tried to save jobs or they tried to save the schools, but how are we saving the culture? How are we saving the stories? Too often when I talk to folks, in certain communities, they say, well, I don't know this community anymore. It's not the same neighborhood that I grew up in. And so what we've been really intentional about doing is going out and talking to residents and documenting their stories so that we can continue to have those stories passed down. Some of the arts specifically that we have been working on is the Anacostia River Art Walk. And so if you go down to Anacostia Park, we have the Anacostia Trail. And we work with some high school students and the Ward 8 Arts Collaborative to build these, are they murals or? So sculptural art murals, I don't know. I'm sure there's some artists in here that can correct me. But to build some signs that really can kind of tell the history of the community along the trail. Scott already mentioned the Anacostia River Festival that happens every year. That's really just a celebration of the arts in the river. We have our 295 underpass. Scott talked earlier about some of the barriers that exist. And so what has happened is we have this highway, the 295 highway that literally cuts off the community from this amazing natural resource, the Anacostia River and the Anacostia River Park. And so what we've done is actually commissioned some work, some photography and artwork to go under the underpass, just to make it more inviting for people to go into to access that community. We also have collaborations with organizations like, so in Anacostia Park, they have a skating rink and it's free to DC residents. You just got to go down and show your license. And so, and combining that with go-go. And so for those that might not know, go-go is DC state music. And so how are we making sure, we're talking about that culture and those stories. How are we making sure that we're amplifying those stories? This piece right here, again, talking about decision-making power. We had a curatorial committee that was made up primarily of residents that selected this work right here. This is going to be a commission art that's going to be a part of the park, but it's by a mother and daughter duo that are DC residents, but it was local residents who were the ones that selected that particular piece of art. And then here's some other artworks that are going to be designed. This one up second from the top. I didn't mention when we're talking about the small business, we have a small business kiosk that will be launching in May. And ultimately, again, the community decided who was going to design the kiosk. But the purpose of the kiosk is it's going to allow a different business every month to launch their products and to really just be serve as an entry point for them into the community to see how their products would fare in the community. The Community Leadership Empowerment Workshop is something that was birthed out of really just a community member coming up to us and saying, hey, we appreciate that your process is inclusive. However, some people still feel like they don't have the powers or don't have the confidence to make a decision that their voice will be heard. And so we worked with this gentleman by the name of Bob Hoffman, who helped us create this, this curriculum that we call CLUE Community Leadership Empowerment Workshops. And what it has done has really taught people around understanding the city planning process, personal leadership, and community organizing. And we've just seen amazing success stories just to come out of that program alone. The last thing that I'll share is our Thrive East of the River program. We talked a lot about being intentional and how we can't do this work if it wasn't for partnership. And so Scott and I met with some other nonprofit organizations that were located right in Ward 8, where we are located, with Martha's Table, Far Southeast Family Strengthening Collaborative, with Bread for the City, to say, hey, listen, all of us are doing this amazing work. What are something, how can we work together? What was birthed out of that was the Thrive East of the River program, where in just over a year, we were able to raise $4 million or over $4 million and support a little over 600 families with $5,500 of financial assistance. This was during COVID. So $5,500 of financial assistance that they could use that money to spend however they chose, and they never had to pay back. They also had free food once a week, but they also received monthly home goods. And so again, just to me, that just showed the impact of partnership and how when we can start to get out of our silos and work together, you can really start to have collective impact in your community. The last thing, I believe this is my last slide. The last thing I'll share is some of the lessons learned is, just really being intentional and acting early. Scott talked a little bit earlier about time and timeliness, but we are dealing with the urgency of time and how we just need to get out there and move now, to have action now, do something now. Putting the community at the center. If you haven't heard anything I said, remember this thing: the answers are always in the community. I'm gonna say it one more time. The answers are always in the community. You don't have the answers. Go to the community, listen to them. The answers are in the community. Change moves at the speed of trust. The more you can build trust with folks, the more you allow change, you'll see change take place. But trust doesn't take place overnight. The cynicism that exists in a lot of our communities did not take place overnight. They took place over generations. And so we can't expect that trust to be rebuilt overnight. Sometimes it's going to take over generations. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. If there are things that already exist in the community, we should just go in there and figure out how we can partner with some of those community organizations or city agencies and duplicate and amplify the work. To impact the future, you have to know the past, right? Oftentimes when we go into the community, we just see the community for what it is, but not what it was. And so being able to understand the historical context of the community can help you to create a more successful future for those communities. Taking a multi-sector approach. I think one of the things that really attracted funders about this grant was this opportunity to bring workforce, to bring housing, to bring small business together, and to say, you know what, even though they seem like they are much different sectors, oftentimes we have the same identified target population. And so what are opportunities where we can come together and then provide this collective resource? What gets measured gets done. If you don't measure it, it's probably not going to get done. So in the beginning, set some very clear and measurable goals so that you can track them. If we were to do this work again, we would have been much more intentional around policy work and advocacy. And part of what we're doing right now, I said, if we were to do it again, we kind of are, because what we understood around this equitable development plan was it couldn't be a static event. As community changes, we understood that the document was going to need to change too. And so we are going through different iterations. And so we're literally in the process right now of the third iteration of what our equitable development plan will look like. And so, a lot of those meetings that I talked about, I've been hosting and facilitating similar meetings over the last 3 or 4 months, meeting with stakeholders again, meeting with community residents and asking, hey, what are we doing good? What do we need to change? What's working already? What are some of the things that we missed? We went through a whole pandemic. Nobody expected that. What needs to take place now and so that it can be a part of the next equitable development plan. And then finally, again, I've said it 1,000 times, collaborate, 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 collaborate. When you are in this work, no matter what you're doing, make sure that you're building strong partnerships. And if you're building those partnerships with community members are the experts. They have a lived experience that has a tremendous value, and you'd be doing a disservice to them and to yourself if you don't tap into that expertise. And this final slide is just a list of a lot of the organizations that we've partnered with over the last few years. Honestly, we probably have to add 2 or 3 more slides if we listed absolutely everybody we worked with. Thank you all so much. Am I handing it over to Brenda? I'm gonna get the mic over to Brenda. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I first want to apologize. I have a Samsung phone that I just purchased and do not know how to cut it off. And that's why you've been hearing this ringing. So if anybody knows, Scott and Vaughn, we both tried to cut this phone off. Won't be embarrassed. Oh, here's someone coming, seem to know. I hope so. I think it looks like you cut it down.
I cut it down to mute.
And this is a potential spam. Just keep calling me. Yeah, I can't. So I don't know what to say. Well, let me go on because I know time is a factor. Oh, no, okay. Oh. Again, good afternoon, everyone. All right. I'm an old lady. I know I only was born in 1947, but things just, okay, that's, it's.
There's nothing, it'll just fire.
Okay, just vibrate. Okay, sure. Thank you, Scott. And I want to thank also the Creative Placemakers planners for this opportunity to hear my perspective of the planning and building of the 11th Street Bridge Park. A park that will be resilient and inclusive venue for all people east of the river, west of the river. By including residents living on both sides of the Anacostia River, it could help ease the gentrification emotions by creating a space for all people to interact and enjoy activities in the same venue. The two communities coming together can foster respect and the sharing of each other's culture. Most residents live east of the river are African Americans, and many non-African Americans live in the Navy Yard area west of the river. I give credit to William C. Smith and Company for understanding and creating the 11th Street Bridge Park concept of engaging residents east of the river in the very beginning of the design and also coming up with the purpose of the park. Scott and his team hosted over 1,000 community meetings, which allowed us to express our desire to request the kinds of family-oriented activities and take advantage of the employment, economic, and entrepreneurship opportunities. I must say that not everyone trusted there would be opportunities from the development of the 11th Street Bridge Park. Those doubts come from the past of approximately 40 years of social ills that include substance abuse, mental health issues in the home, homelessness, lack of educational and recreation opportunities for children and youth to thrive in their community. which is why it's difficult to trust and believe that this development can be an opportunity for them. And of course, the continued uptick of violence that has dampened our hope for the future. This bridge park is the first major development in recent years that has allowed residents to voice their concerns and desires. We are observing thousands of unaffordable housing units being built all around us, in a sense with no preparation for the existing residents and what I call gentrification of DC. The Bridge Park team has made a concerted effort in making sure that the Bridge Park will be for all people. What can be done? Better social and human services for families that live in at-risk neighborhoods that include home visits, monitoring of students' attendance, giving them in their early grades experience and knowledge that will enhance their feelings of hope for their future and being whatever and whoever they want to be. If they feel that there's hope for their future, it would not matter who moves into their neighborhood. They can still thrive. Thank you for this opportunity.
Hello? This one? Yes. Wow. That's amazing. What a way to kick off a creative placemaking minor, I have to say. You know, creating place out of almost nothing. It's really fabulous. Can you imagine a hammock garden and all those mushrooms? Oh my God. Little jazz, little blues. So now we'll open up the questions. Anybody, please. Let's go.
So I'm tired today, and I almost left the session. I'm really glad. It's really amazing. I work for an Israeli-Palestinian arts organization in Jerusalem. You're just temporarily. Oh, thank you. Thanks.
My name is Karen Benoit-Sar, and I'm a visiting artist here at University of Maryland with Omar. And I live in Jerusalem usually, and we have a new Israeli-Palestinian art center exactly on the border between East and West Jerusalem, between Israeli and Palestinian neighborhoods. Sits on a massive public park that has been all but abandoned because of tension and violence. So this couldn't have been more relevant. And I understand why, I think somebody mentioned 11 years, this project, the depth of work, obviously it had to take 11 years, absolutely extraordinary. The question I want to ask is specifically about the economic displacement, the threat of economic displacement. It's a gorgeous project. Clearly, it looks like it would make the whole area for both sides of the river so much more desirable. And I know that you're being intentional about the threat of economic displacement, but I guess I would like to curious if you could go a little bit deeper into the tools that you have vis-a-vis the market, vis-a-vis market forces, small businesses vis-a-vis big corporations that ultimately want. What are the tools, and have you seen it done successfully anywhere else?
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll let Scott jump on anything. One of the things that I didn't share is while we've already raised about, I'll back up. Oftentimes what we would get was, why do we need a park when we need a grocery store? Right? Like in east of the river, currently there's 3 grocery stores for a little over 150,000 residents. When you just go over to Ward 6, there's about 15 grocery stores for about 75,000 people, right? And so what I offer counter to folks is, why can't we have both? Why can't we have a grocery store and an amazing park, right? And what has happened is, because of the park, and so change is coming in the community, right? Regardless of the Bridge Park, if you walk down the Anacostia Trail, you'll see at any point 14 or 15 cranes. And so you're going to see these cranes up, right? And development's coming and change is coming. And so we can either stick our head in the sand and say, oh, it's not going to happen, or we can actually try to turn development on its head and say, hey, we can actually use this development to support us, right? And to help the community residents. And so what has happened is, we've already raised $86 million, not that's going to be to build the park, but that has been invested in the community, right? And so some of that $86 million are to the things that are already listed, right? It was the community leadership empowerment workshops, or it's providing down payment costs or closing offering closing assistance to people that are purchasing homes. It is providing both it's providing support to some of those businesses, it's providing low interest loans to some of those businesses. It's providing workforce training opportunities so that people can not just work entry-level job or minimum wage job, but they can actually have a working force job. And so looking at how we can support the community holistically, I think the Community Land Trust is another excellent tool where currently we have about 242 units of permanently affordable units for district residents. Those are units that aren't only going to be affordable for this generation, but they're homes that can be affordable for generations for our great grandkids, so that the people that are from this community can continue to stay in this community. Scott, would you share anything else?
I'd only add, but one, you can go to our website at bridgepark.org/equity, and you can download the equitable development plan. You can read through all of those 36, 37 strategies that are in there. I'd also encourage you to, from the beginning, senior scholars from the Urban Institute have been evaluating this, and they just last year or 2 years ago came out with their latest white paper, sort of saying, what do we get right and what do we get wrong? If you Google 11th Street Bridge Park and Urban Institute, you'll see a 4-year study that you can read the executive summary, or you can read, if you're really into this like we are, you can read all 96 pages of it. And I think the last two things I'd say is this is all, I mean, and Vaughn hit this again and again, this is all about partnerships. A huge amount of that $86 million that we've already invested in these equitable development strategies come from our one of our key partners, LISC DC. It's a community development financial institution, a CDFI, that they provided half of a full-time staff person to help create this equitable development plan, because this isn't our world of expertise. I'm a museum, my background, I worked 20 years in museum education, right? What do I know from standing at Community Land Trust? But they not only provided that key expertise, but then when we created the strategies, they said, we need to help implement this. So they made a commitment of investing $50 million in that same 1 mile area. They've blown past that. They're now at $67 million, right? Invested in that same sort of 1 mile area around the park. Vaughn mentioned this before, but I think as we're rethinking, as we're updating the equitable development plan, we're really leaning into policy, right? If the reason why there's an 81 times difference between the average household wealth of white families and black families in DC, 81 times, right? It's because there's been systemic racism that's been just baked into the pie. If we're really going to be tackling these issues, we need to get down to those policy issues, right? And so I'll give you one example. We raised millions of dollars for property acquisition for the Community Land Trust, focused on the immediate area of the Bridge Park, but now the Community Land Trust is expanding across the city, right? We can test and pilot some of these strategies, raise private money to help implement these, and if successful, we then can expand to even beyond the district, where we're now advising nearly a dozen similar projects around the country. So, so I'd encourage you to again go to bridgepark.org/equity. I'd also encourage you. There was a really thoughtful piece done in the New York Times about the equitable development work. If you just Google New York Times and 11th Street Bridge Park, it'll pop up from August. It's about a 7,000-word essay, all a deep dive. They spent about 11 months focused of lessons learned from this, and I think that can be really helpful too. Finally, we're always around to answer any questions too, so we'll make sure that we're stick around and can hand out cards.
Ronit?
And then I'll go. One of the main powers behind voice in a community is ownership. So how has residents being owners changed their ability to walk into a conversation from a place of equity? And how have you seen situations where there's a difference of how people are coming into the community when they're talking about development and talking about what they want to quote unquote do?
So to deal with the owner definition, because that can mean a couple of different things, right? It could be a homeowner, or it could just be an owner of the process, right? Or it could be an owner of their self, right? And to me, I believe making sure that residents have ownership over their choice is what has been extremely important, right? And it's real choice. It's not you get to choose between eating dog food and trash, but it's you getting to have a real choice to say, you know what, this choice is good and this choice is good, but I like this one better, right? And so I'll let Brenda chime in as well as a resident, but what I believe is it gives people more confidence, and it gives them hope, right? Not just confidence, but it also gives them hope, so that, you know, oftentimes in this rat race we call life, like we can just end up in this monotonous cycle where we just continue, you know, it's just like wake up and do it all again. And I feel like when people have real choice, they can start to dream again, and they can start to believe in themselves again. They can start to believe in their families again. They can start to believe in their communities again. And you know, some of the destructive behavior that they may have done in the past, they're choosing different now. And so I feel like I'm going all over the place with this answer, but to me, it shows up in their confidence. It shows up in changed behavior. It shows up in changed attitude. It shows up in them actually wanting to be an asset to their community versus a detriment to their community.
I could you repeat that question?
She was asking the importance of how ownership shows up and how it shows up in like resident behavior, or how they're approaching the project, or how they're approaching the community once they have that ownership. Does that capture it? Yeah.
My experience, I've been here since 1947. Okay. And it's just different now to me. When I was coming up and we had our own home, everybody's having pride in your own home. Even in Southeast, when we moved in Parklands in 54. And it was just like pride of living there. But it's changed. What has changed is people, the violence, the disrespect. And that's why it's kind of hard for me to answer that, because when people think now of owning their own home, a lot of them think about moving out of the city. They're trying to save their children. You know, they're trying to, you know, be able to go outside, you know, without being whatever, you know, having all the violence around. And the fact of the trauma that a lot of people are suffering. So a lot of people would love to stay. I have friends moved out to Maryland, Virginia. They would love to come back, you know, but we got to get the government serious about dealing with the issue of mental health, substance abuse, the violence, you know, it's like wild out here. The cars running red lights and all kinds of stuff that's going on. It's hard for me to really answer that. Vaughn, you did a better job, but.
More question.
About like long-term development projects, like when you mentioned the purple line, and like I was also thinking of like Route 1 construction, how they like create a lot of like accessibility barriers when there's broken ground, and maybe projects that lose funding in the middle of them and then start up again. And there's just like, especially like right around here, like you've probably driven around campus, like Stamp is completely not accessible to like people with like mobility aids and things like that. So I'm just curious, like what are ways that like as communities you can like be aware of, like, and like these really long-term projects that you have to like wait for the community and do a lot of this research while still like addressing that the physical space is still there.
Yeah, I'll maybe take a stab at that, but I think something that we've been really intentional about is how do you build the little wins? How do you build some the successes so that people don't have to wait for like the whole thing to open right in 2026, for instance? And so To date, we've invested several $100,000 in these art projects, for instance, of getting, I mean, when you come down just from the Navy Yard, right, coming down to where the bridge is, you're wedged between a security wall from the Department of Defense and a freeway on ramp, right? It's not the most pedestrian or bike friendly or anything else, right? And it has created this huge barrier, just as it has on the east side of the river, to get down to the river. So we partnered with the Navy Museum and the Capitol Riverfront bid to mine through these amazing historical images of the Navy Yard. That's one of the oldest employers in the District of Columbia, to install these giant sort of images that are still up and on display right now to soften that experience sort of coming down, right? Is that going to solve the issue of accessibility? No, but we can also be an advocate for the Washington Area Bicycle Association, WABA, as they're now been lobbying DDOT, the District Department of Transportation, to have a bike, you're kind of taking your life into your hands if you're in a bike or pedestrian coming down on either side, to have a protected bike lane coming down then from Capitol Hill, right? Where we're not necessarily doing the work, but we're lending our voices to it. I think one last thing to mention is that the federal government has a new series, a new grant program that's really innovative called Reconnecting Communities. They just announced the first, the slew of grants yesterday. It's $250 million a year for the next 5 years, $1 billion of development, or for the next 4 years. And it's explicitly about how to undo some of the damage from some of these construction projects that oftentimes have blasted through communities of color and created these larger barriers. One project that just got a significant amount of funding is this amazing project in Minneapolis called Reconnecting Rondo, where it's the neighborhood of Rondo. It's an African-American community where they had this channelized the freeway that just destroyed this thriving African-American community, and local residents there are now looking to cap the entire freeway and reclaim it, right? And it's amazing. We've advised them, we've supported them, we've tried to see what we can do, but do a search for Reconnecting Communities, because there's you can see what really exciting work is happening around the United States, and B, it's nice to see there's actually federal money that's involved to support that. Oh, and also the other project that just got funded was the Bridge to Nowhere in Baltimore. They just got an initial $2 million grant to begin some of that planning work, which is super exciting.
Truly inspirational. I want to thank all three of you for a really fabulous presentation. So I know we'd like to stay and ask a lot more questions, but let me turn it back over to Ronit to close the show.
I'm just going to say one thing, and then actually Dean Jourdan is going to close the show. But I wanted to just say one thing. First of all, it's realizing that you can stay there, that the collaborations that we're seeing that folks here have presented today in their practice is really inspirational for us to think about how we break our silos down within the university. And I think that's something for us to think about as we develop this minor and also the Creative Placemaking Collaborative. And so I think it really models a way that we too need to think and need to work more on that. I really appreciate that. I wanted to also just say one other thing, just to bring it home. You saw projects that ranged from students working with faculty in the university, and now we see this ginormous project, right, in a community over a long period of time. What do they have to do with each other? And also we had a series of wonderful artists and designers presenting their work. One of the things is that the work of creative placemaking and keeping isn't at a single scale, either in time or in space. And I hope that that's one of the things that people take away. And we just, got snippets, but when we think about the 11th Street Bridge project in that first panel, Mēlani and Irfana and Omar were all working with this team as artists and designers, and Irfana working on arts and cultural equity plan for the community, as Mēlani was working on selecting the artists and working with the community in that design work and choosing that. So I want everybody to think about that. Those roles are, this work is integrated, and though we had them on separate panels, they kind of all come together. And with that, I would like to welcome our Dean Jourdan, to close us out. I'm so grateful, Dawn, for all of your work in supporting this effort and moving forward to working together on this big project. Thank you.
We could start playing a game of never have I ever, right? Never have I ever engaged in song in the architecture auditorium before today. And I think that provides the perfect context for what I'd like to say very briefly in parting to you. We all occupy space all the time. You occupy it in your car, at your house, in your kitchen, when you come into the building. But what we hope for and strive for is to create places. And the difference between spaces and places are the life we infuse. I mean, I love glass blowers. I will watch them on television or live anywhere I can. And my favorite movement is when they spin something and they make a hole and they breathe into it. They use a tube and they breathe life into it. And to me, that's what placemaking is. And today, by singing, by sharing, by showing art, by talking to each other, we created a place. We created a place for placemaking. And I hope this will always be your home for this partnership between RHU and the School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. I hope it will be your home in the friendships and partnerships you make today. The conversation is not over. You may be exhausted, but I hope you get that sort of added spark of energy to go out into the atrium with us, have a little nourishment, because placemaking always involves food and something for sustenance. So please join us for that. And if you have a little time, we'd like to invite you to the soft opening of the next exhibit in the Keibel Gallery, which features the DuPont Circle, another place that's very important to the history. And gallery curator Lindsay May, Associate Dean of Student Services, is here to take you through. We'll invite you back in April for the formal launch party, but tonight she's agreed to a little sneak peek if you'd like that. But thank you to Ronit and Patrick. This would not have happened without their. And of course, thank you to all the staff, faculty, and students who helped make this possible. As you saw with the PowerPoint slides and the technology today and everything else, it takes a whole village to pull these off. So all of the people in the village are busy and participating today. They may be learning and enjoying, but they're also working really hard. So I just want to take a moment to express my gratitude for that. All right, with that, we'll see you next year. Please join us in the lobby.
Thank you to all our guests.
Yeah. Yes.